Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
Gin, smokable stimulants, and sleep deprivation, the perfect ingredients in a recipe for disaster, especially when the pot they're brewing in is a mentally ill squatter that likes to wave around big sticks when he's mad. The man described as Darl, my dad's old high school buddy, the 40-something-year-old antagonist of one of my life's more traumatic events, which took place back in 2015. It was a warm, fragrant springtime afternoon, and I was an 18-year-old kid coming home from a day of class at the local community college, coming home to my dad's anarchist trap house that my friend and I decided to move into as roommates a year before. It was a small, one-story downtown house in an upscale neighborhood, and it had 5 to 7 vagabond guests or couch surfers at any given time. That's up to 10 people under one roof, or 2 if you count the shed. Conflict was inevitable. I entered in through the side gate, from the well-manicured, street-facing front into the neglected, junk-filled back. There he was, sitting at his crooked, worn-out metal table placed right in my path to the bent-up screen door. Darryl was dressed in his finest filthy, brown jacket as he carved his latest piece of stick art. He looked up at me with glazed eyes and an absent expression. This struck me as odd, since, although he was weird, he wasn't usually this weird. When I looked closer at his table, I saw why. Along with his usual random pieces of metal and rocks he used for his wands, there was a blackened glass tube, a lighter, and a 4/5 empty gallon jug of rock gut gin. The gin I had watched him bring home with him the night before. The night before, he had been partying, having fun, and acting fairly normal, but the presence of the charred, straight shot glass pipe on the table explained how he had stayed awake this whole time. I gave Darl a modest greeting, to which he responded with an awkward head movement and unfriendly grunt as he continued to aggressively carve a stick. This body language gave me a dark vibe, full of animosity. What I experienced while walking it was unusual, but nothing too crazy to me. I had seen worse in that house, and had such a chip on my shoulder, I was almost itching for some kind of altercation to take my anger out on a daily basis. If this was my opportunity to protect my territory, I would do it with pleasure. I was a massive stoner and a bit of an alcoholic at the time, and upon arriving home, I usually would have stopped by my friend's room to say hi and smoke a bowl or two, but he was at his mom's house that night, which meant that, unfortunately, he was not able to witness the events that would be taking place over the following couple of hours. Although I had substance issues, I was still an honor roll student, so instead of smoking a bowl, I just went straight back to my room to get some economics homework done. I had worked for about 45 minutes before focusing became impossible due to loud noises and yelling coming from the kitchen, which was just beyond the hallway entrance, mere feet from my bedroom door. This was simply not something I would tolerate, so I grabbed my 2009 digital camera. I didn't have a smartphone, and made my way to the heart of the commotion. Holding my camera, I entered the kitchen to find my dad and his 2 tough biker friends huddled together near the sink. Darryl had, more or less, cornered the dent. His arms were outstretched, making his jacket appear like brown wings as he held up his largest stick in one hand, like Rafiki's staff in The Lion King. When I had walked in, I said nothing to alert him to my presence. I simply held up the camera to record him as he verbally spilled his darkest demons on all of us. He was belligerently screaming at my dad and his friends, but his biggest target was Joe, our lovable old biker dude who has been my dad's friend my whole life, and who never treated Darl with anything but friendliness and respect. Darl was screaming about how he was a racist, while Joe continued to deny it, raising his voice to match. While I can't speak for Joe's personal beliefs, I will emphasize that Darl did not face any sort of discrimination under our roof. He may have felt disrespected at times, but his behavior was often unacceptable, and any confrontation was well deserved. During one of his loud, drunken, barely coherent rants, Darl had begun hitting all the wooden cabinets with his stick, pairing his screaming with the crazed rhythms of a wild man. I continued to hold the camera out towards him, making no attempt to hide it or leave the room, all while he creeped his way towards me, whacking each cabinet along the way. You may see me as naive and crazy to do this, but I was filled with excitement. My desire to record him was mainly for evidence. He turned his head to face mine at an unnatural speed. His face squidged into a scowl as he laid eyes on me and my camera. With his rock gut gin breath, he got up in my face, waving his stick around in his hand as if to threaten me. "Get that camera out of my face, boy," he slurred. I cursed back at him in defiance and held firm as he tried to grab it from me. We wrestled back and forth forth from my green digital camera for about 10 seconds as it continued to record. Fortunately, I was able to get it back, and as I did, he moved to get close and intimidate me again, more aggressively now. Even though he was 10 inches taller than me, 18-year-old me had a tendency to be numb to situations like this, and my fear response had lessened with time. As he towered over me, my right hand rested around the closed lid of an empty cookie jar sitting on the kitchen table. At that moment, I knew if he got out of hand, that jar would be my last resort. I loosened my grip on the jar, pushed Darl away, and watched him move back from me and make his way back to torment my dad and his friends again. I took this opportunity to put my camera back in my room, and came out a minute later to find that my dad and the biker dudes had gone to my dad's back room. Darl had gone back to his dirty mattress in the dark shadows of the living room in the front of the house. Things had lulled, and I still had homework to do, so I went back to my room. After about a half hour, darkness had fallen outside, and things were too quiet. Something had to be wrong. I wanted to check on my dad and his friends, so I left my room and found myself alone in an eerie, grimy kitchen with the lights on and dark windows facing the night. There was a soft mumbling to my left. Darl was kneeling in the dim rays of light, cast from the kitchen to the contrasting darkness of the living room. He was holding 2 billiard balls he had taken from the pool table, one in each upward-facing hand, and outstretched arms. His head rolled back to face the ceiling in a perfect position to channel demons like an antenna. Like his head, his eyes were rolled back, with only the bloodshot whites being visible. As his head gently jerked around with his satanic mumbling, the dim light reflected off his bald scalp, shaven smooth with a razor. His unkempt salt and pepper goatee was specked with foamy dribble. Seconds after I saw him, he jolted into life like an animated corpse. His face contorted into a hatred I haven't seen before or since, as he lodged toward me from his kneeled position, still holding the pool balls in each hand. Thinking quickly, I grabbed the cookie jar and, with Darl close on my tail, retreated to my dad's room. Fortunately, the lights were on here as well, and the room had a door connecting to the backyard. He caught up to me there, so I pushed him back into a ragged wooden table in the corner, which broke under his weight. He quickly recovered, and sneered back at me as he bolted up from the wreckage. As he did so, I stumbled out the back door, tripped backward down the 2 concrete steps, and landed on the cement patio bordering the grass. Time had condensed in that moment, as all of this occurred in just a few seconds. When I landed, the cookie jar in my right hand had broken and I was bleeding heavily from a large gash on my palm, caused by the broken porcelain, but there was no pain. I wound up my pitching arm from my position on the ground, and as he was about to make his way through the back door, I launched the jagged remnants of the cookie jar, which still weighed at least a pound or 2, through the air. Lucky strike, the cookie jar crashed through the glass window in the back door and hit Darl squarely on the forehead. He went limp and collapsed onto the floor of my dad's room. He didn't get up. It was his turn to bleed. Having faced this entire situation alone, I made my way to the shed to find my dad, his 60-year-old biker friend Joe, and Joe's other biker friend. I opened the shed door and there they were, all sitting in a close circle, whispering to each other. Tough men, cowering in this tiny one-room living space in the corner of the yard. These 3 grown men left 18-year-old me alone to fend for myself in a house with a violent psychopath. But I forgave them. They genuinely seemed terrified, and I was thanked profusely by all of them for solving their problem. I appreciated the ego boost, but we still had 2 problems. I was bleeding heavily, and Darl was unconscious and bleeding twice as much as I was. I was advised to wrap my wounds, get in my car, and drive the 25 minutes to my grandma's house in the woods. I bled in my car all the way to grandma's house. When I was there, I soaked my wounds in soapy water, hoping to avoid getting stitches, since I still didn't know if I was considered a criminal or not, and wanted to lie low. About 20 minutes into soaking, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I had a feeling it was related to the event that had just taken place, and I was correct. It was a deputy from the sheriff's department. At the scene of the crime, I was quaking, but explained to her exactly what happened in complete honesty. Her response filled me with lightness like a helium balloon. It was self-defense, she had said, and Darl was obviously blacked out and having a psychotic episode. According to the police, Darl was found lying in a pool of blood on the front porch. A neighbor had called the police, and when they arrived, Darl had woken up and begun to attack them, screaming about racism. Apparently, he believed the police were racist and there to harass him. He believed he was becoming a victim of racist police brutality and decided to attack the police before they attacked him. He attacked a female police officer too. That cool. After learning that, I got back in the car to drive myself to the emergency room and continued to make a bloody mess of it for the whole 25-minute drive there. That night, I stayed over at my grandma's house. When I went back to my dad's dad's house the next day, I learned a few details from my dad about what happened after I left. Darl had bled so much that my dad and his friends were unable to absorb it faster than it was coming out, even after using all the towels in the house. It was at that point that they dragged him onto the front porch. They wanted to be done with him and let society deal with it. Darl got treated at the hospital himself that night and spent the next 2 weeks in jail for disorderly conduct. I'm happy to say that he never came back to our house and I never saw him again. In a sense, my dad and his friends were right. I did solve a problem. The guy was a squatter and a menace, and now he was gone. This part, he was so messed up on drugs, he could hardly remember what happened. He thought it was Joe the biker who hit him. He has no memory of fighting with me. Now, 7 years later, this event still stands out to me in the story of my life. I learned a lot from spending a year living in an anarchist trap house, but the biggest thing I learned is to stand up for yourself and your territory, even when it makes people not like you, and to always watch out for tweakers when they drink cheap gin. For some context, I'm a 32-year-old female. This happened to me when I was about 25 or 26. I work full-time as a researcher at a university, which is where these encounters took place. I'm not a professor or anything, and because of my age at the time, I could have easily been mistaken for just another student wandering around campus. On some days, when the weather was nice, I would prefer to spend my lunch hour strolling around the university grounds outside, or sitting underneath a shady tree on a bench, enjoying the time I was not sitting in a cramped corner of a lab. On one of these days, I was sitting on a bench enjoying the fresh air, and a male student walking by asked if he could sit next to me. I'm a pretty shy and awkward kind of person, so even though I really would have preferred sitting alone, I said, sure. He initiated simple conversation, to which I obliged, but being careful not to be too forthcoming. He mentioned he had seen which departmental building I came and went from, which slightly alarmed me, given I had never seen this person before in my life. But I pushed the thought from my mind. After all, the weather had been decent lately, and I had spent nearly all my lunch hours for the past week outside. He asked if I was studying within the mentioned department, to which I told him that I was not a student, but rather I worked there. He told me he was an engineering student, and then followed up with asking me out to coffee sometime. I apologized, and told him that I had a boyfriend and would have to decline. We parted ways after that, and I assumed I probably wouldn't see him around again. About a week or two went by, and I was spending another lunch hour outside on campus, sitting on a different bench somewhere. Seemingly out of nowhere, the same man from before asked if he could sit next to me again. Admittedly, I don't remember what he started talking to me about at first. My mind was reeling, and I was rather uncomfortable having to potentially turn this guy down a second time. Sure enough, he asked me again if we could go out for coffee sometime. I apologized, and reminded him that I had a boyfriend and would not be meeting him for coffee. And again, he left after that. I was feeling rather anxious now, but it still hadn't reached a level where I felt I had to be too concerned. A few days later, I had finished work and was leaving the building to walk to where I had parked my car. The university charges a fortune for parking passes, even if you're employed by them, so I had always opted for free street parking about a 10-minute walk away from campus. My walking route would take me down several quiet residential streets with minimal car traffic. Even pedestrian traffic was pretty sparse on the busiest of days. It wasn't until I was about halfway to my car, down one of these quiet back streets, that I noticed someone walking directly across the street from me, but keeping a few paces behind. I noticed him from my peripheral vision and didn't want to flat out turn around to stare at him. It wasn't uncommon to see someone else by any means. I was just always trying to be aware of my surroundings when walking the streets alone. I had to make a few turns coming up anyways, and the chance that they would be going the same way as me was slim. But he did. He made all the turns I did, still walking on the sidewalk across from me, a few steps behind. I still did not want to look at whoever this was. I didn't want him to know that I was aware of what I thought he was doing. I quickened my pace to a speedy walk. I was approaching the first of two busier streets before I would reach my car. His pace quickened to keep up with me. That was the moment I panicked, the moment I was sure that he was indeed following me. After that, I started a full-out jog to cross the first of the busier streets. He ran to keep up behind me and was now on the same side of the street I was. I was now nearly at my car. I had to cross the last busy street and get about 100 meters and I would be there. But it was crossing the street that worried me. I often had to stop and wait a good minute or so before it was clear enough to do so. If this were the case, he would catch up with me, as if the stars aligned. As soon as I made it running to the busy street, I had a gap to cross. I booked it as fast as I could, finally turning around once I had made it to look and yell at the man who had been pursuing me. It was him. I could have suspected, but now it was confirmed. It was the engineering student whom I had turned down for coffee. "Stop following me," I yelled at him from across the busy street. "Can I just talk to you?" He yelled back. I didn't even answer him. I mean, the answer should have been obvious from the start, and I was certainly never going to give my time to anyone who had just followed and then chased me for about 1 kilometer. I keep moving quickly to my car, so determined to get out of there that I didn't even care if he saw which car was mine. He had given up following me and never tried to cross the road to my relief. I got home and broke down. I mean, worse things had happened to other people, no doubt, and I was not harmed, fortunately, but I was shook. I had some anxieties walking to and from work after that. It wasn't long before a coworker and I would walk most of the distance back to our cars together after work. I'd even changed where I started parking for a time. A few weeks had passed since the incident, and I had not seen him around campus at all. I had started spending my lunches in the lab instead of outside, but occasionally I would go to the student center to buy lunch instead. This one particular day, the food court in the student center was packed, almost shoulder to shoulder. I was standing in line at a burger stall, and I heard a guy try and get someone's attention through the crowd. I look up, and it's him again, waving to me and trying to make his way through the people. I panicked, and even though I'm terribly shy, I started a scene and yelled to him to leave me alone. His face dropped instantly as people stared at us, and he slinked back into the sea of students. My heart was pounding, and I was shaking. I don't even remember if I ended up getting food after that. I went back to work, and from then on, was even more focused on my surroundings than I ever was before. It's been 5 or 6 years since then now, and I still work at the university. I am so relieved to say I never saw him again after the food court, and haven't had any other harrowing accounts on campus. I am still diligent about being aware of my surroundings, especially when I have to walk to and from campus alone. I never asked the guy his name, so I couldn't even report an incident to campus police or anything. All in all, I'm just glad I never saw him again, and I can only hope he never did this to any other girl before or after me. I was 17 when this story happened 3 years ago now. I was working at an old pizza shop right on the edge of my town. For context, the town I was in is an affluent, suburban town surrounded by a bypass which loops around the town. Around my town is some farmland and main roads where all of the blue-collar workers moved to after the town was gentrified 10 to 15 years back. This pizza shop was around for 20 years and was very catered to these same blue-collar workers. It's around 9 at night and a call comes in for 2 pizzas and a 2-liter of soda. I'm the only driver in, so I have to take the delivery out. It's about a 10-minute drive to get to the location. There I have to drive up a long, gravel driveway that took 5 minutes to get up. My car really couldn't handle the gravel and how rough it was. Arriving at the place, I see a nice house and 2 barns plotted across the land with weak 5 to 6 feet tall surrounding the whole property. I've always been really anxious around farms because of how creepy I think they are. Being at this place when I felt truly all alone really started to make my anxiety flare. I decided to call the number on the order because I have no idea where this guy wants me to go and drop off his food. After about another 5 minutes of absolute silence, the man picks up. He had a very deep and raspy voice, like he's been a career smoker, which didn't do anything to help me feel better. I was told to meet him at his truck at the far barn on his property. I am now properly pooping myself as my mind races of all of the worst possible things that could happen to me. I pull myself together and muster further into this guy's property. I see the man's truck as I round one of those cylinder storage units where I see his truck and him inside. Instead of getting out, I call him and ask him how we should do the transaction. In that same deep voice, he instructs me to get out of my car and put all of the food onto his truck bed. Since he paid with his credit card already, I thought this would have been over in 10 seconds. I do what he tells me to do and walk over to the passenger window so that he can sign his receipt. The man looks to be around in his middle 40s, heavy set, with a scraggly black beard and a trucker hat. I'm a pretty skinny guy, so with my mind already racing on the being kidnapped or murdered, I really don't feel safe around this guy. I ask him if he has a pen on him because I forgot to bring one. I was pretty bad at my job and he did not have any cash on him. He stares at me with these cold eyes and points into the back of his truck, saying to me, "If you ask me for a tip, I'm going to be sticking this tip down your throat," where he has a double barrel shotgun just in the back of his car. I'm frozen in fear as I'm registering that this man has just threatened to kill me. Not only that, but this is the second time this has happened this shift. Yeah, I kid you not. The first time was because I messed up the address for a house and a man in his 60s wearing a cowboy hat comes outside inside and says he has the right to shoot trespassers when I was just trying to see if I was at the right house. The only thing I can muster out is okay, and I get back into my car and I get out of that farm. I was going so fast that I screwed up my car from my car bouncing around on that gravel path. I go 80 all the way back to the pizza parlor where I tell my coworkers what happened. None of my coworkers took me seriously and just thought I was playing this up for a joke. I go home and forget about it pretty quickly, but a year later I'm working the lunch shift and the same man calls in and orders a pizza. Now at this point I am refusing to take this order, but this was during the pandemic and the place was on its last legs already, so management forced me to go in anyways. It was only 1 or 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday, so at least my fear of the dark would be covered. I get there and the man is waiting for me at his actual house. He recognized me and out of all things started apologizing to me for what he said. He was excusing it, saying that he just started going through a divorce and was struggling with his emotions. I just wanted the whole thing to be over with, and he gave me $60 for what happened. Still, to the man on the farm, I hope we never meet again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. So, I'm of the mindset that everyone should know a little bit about cars. I've always been mechanically inclined and I think that may have saved me. I was using dating apps a few years ago, met this guy, he seemed super nice. We talked for a few weeks before I was willing to meet with him. His dad owned a local gun store where I would go get my target stuff. I used to be in a women's league for competition shooting, so I had seen this guy around and had a decent impression of him, but wanted to be safe. He invited me to a concert at a local town site. It was a concert I really wanted to go to, and I figured it would be safe since it was at a well-known place with a lot of security. I let him pick me up because he had talked about mechanics and cars and he wanted to show me his Mustang. He bragged about how well he kept it running and how he babied it. I was into time trial racing at the time, so I was interested to see what he had done. He picks me up and we start heading to the event. Right before the exit, he says his car is acting funny. I was watching the dash, and if you've been in racing, you know our cars and trucks usually have extra accessories. Whether it's aftermarket racks and gauges or switches, there's usually something aftermarket inside the car. There was nothing extra. The car felt like it was shifting correctly. There was no shudder or noise, nothing to indicate any problems. I was like, that's weird, and all I said was we should try and limp it to the concert venue. It's less than a mile away, and it's better than being stuck on Interstate 15. He agrees and drives us very carefully the last mile. We get to the concert, and things were okay. He kept watching me and buying me drinks. I refused to drink, so every time he gave me what I would make up an excuse and go to the bathroom and flush it. He kept making comments about how well I was handling my alcohol. I was super uncomfortable. The concert ends and it's time to leave. For context, this concert happened at the local reservation town site, and at the time the res did not have great cell service, so I couldn't get a hold of anyone to come get me. I decided to bite the bullet, and I talk him into taking the old highway instead of the 15. It sounds silly, but when you take the old highway, even though it's slower, people are more willing to stop and help you than they are on the freeway. I figured if he was having car troubles it would be safer, and we wouldn't have people flying by us at 80 miles per hour. We make it halfway between the town site and our town, and he says the car is acting funny again and pulls over. I'm stone cold sober and didn't notice anything wrong, so when I get out of the car to check it out with him, he starts making comments about how I'm drunk and I should wait in the car, and that it's safer because you can't trust drunk Indians, especially with a little girl like you. This dude had no idea that I'm actually native and I just had an albinism. The hair on the back of my neck are standing up, so I checked my phone. I just barely have service and start texting my dad. As I'm walking away from the engine compartment, I noticed he was watching me, so I started acting like I was trying to get cell service to get help. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched this man take the spark plug wires off the distributor cap and switch the order. Your spark plug wires connect to the distributor cap based on the order your cylinders fire in, so doing that will either make the car run terrible or not even turn on. I managed to send my dad a picture of what he's doing, and my dad tells me to start walking. As I go to walk away, this guy gets back in the car and opens his glove box, which exposes a pistol he had. He tells me not to worry and we will be safe. I probably broke a world record for how fast I was texting my dad. He says to start walking and tell the guy that he is on his way and that our friends live up the road. So I do. I start walking with a purpose and take off as quick as I can. The guy is yelling after me and I yell back, the wind is too loud and I can't hear you. I'll be back with our friends. I'm scared out of my mind. We are 10 miles out of town with no one around. The closest road actually leads to a cemetery, so there is really no one here to help me. I get a really bad feeling the farther I get from the car, so I turn around and look. The hood is closed. His lights are on, so I decide to hide in the farm irrigation location next to the road. I keep walking towards town and text my dad what's happening. I hear a car slowly coming up behind me and see a flashlight, so I press against the side of the ditch and wait for it to pass. Once I can't hear it anymore, I crawl out and just kind of keep walking along the weeds. My dad texts me that he sees me, so when he pulls up I run to the truck. As we make it towards town, we pass the dude and he's got like 3 cop cars around him. My dad tells me not to worry about what happened. I heard through the grapevine later on he had been charged with violent crimes in the past and that he had been arrested that night for concealed carry without a permit. The police never talked to me, but I haven't seen that guy in town since. If I didn't have experience with cars and didn't know what he was doing, I could have been dead in that ditch instead of hiding. Most communities have where you can take basic car care and maintenance courses. I highly recommend everyone takes them and at least know the basics. This dude knew I knew cars, but his whole goal was to get me so drunk I wouldn't realize what was happening. So let's not meet again, fake car troubles guy. I got a new job, and at my job, there was this guy who used to watch me whenever he was around. We didn't work together, but we worked in the same department. We did sometimes work together, but it was rarely. All the weird stuff started a few months after I started a new job and moved within walking distance to my new job. One October night, I was walking home when a tall man wearing a hoodie came suddenly out of some bushes as I was walking by. I found this bizarre, so before I entered my apartment, I looked back and saw him standing by some trees watching me. When he realized I saw him, he jumped behind the trees to hide. I told my boyfriend and he thought it was drug dealer. Anyway, I started walking through a different trail when a month later I saw the same man. This time he was crouching by the trailer of some parking lot. He got up and started walking away from me but kept watching me. After a week, he showed up again, but this time I was halfway to my home and he came out of hiding behind the trailer and started walking towards me. I beelined from my apartment's door and ran inside. This time he knew that I lived in which apartment, as the previous times I would walk around the front door so that he wouldn't know which apartment I was in. He seemed like he was trying to figure out where I lived, as he could have attacked me multiple times. It doesn't end there. I got laid off and got a new job. After 3 weeks of working there, I was getting on the bus when this guy who looked similar to the guy in the parking lot was watching me get on. I quickly hurried to the back of the bus. When we got to my stop, he pulled the string and got off. I got off as well, but then decided to wait for this guy to keep walking, but unfortunately he slowed down his pace, seemingly waiting for me to pass him. I ended up walking behind him until we got to some lights and he wouldn't move. I decided to walk fast and hide from him in case he was looking for my new job's location. During the time I worked there, I saw my ex-coworker on the train when I was heading back from my interview. He saw me going in the same direction as him and started running. He ran pretty slowly, like he had a limp or something. It was kind of strange, but anyway, I also saw him hanging out the mall when I was there with my mom, but this doesn't really matter as it's a popular place. Anyway, I got laid off from this job due to the pandemic and had a month where I did not go outside much. After a month, I got a new job within walking distance. After 1 week, I was leaving work when there was a guy just watching me again, and he looked similar to the previous guy watching me when I was walking home. So I ran away and got to some lights and didn't see him. For a month and a bit, I didn't see anyone. One night it was relatively warm. I was closing close to midnight and was walking home when I saw a white car parked behind some store, seemingly out of view of any security cameras. I was suspicious of it as it had its headlights and it seemed like someone was sitting in there. I'm walking by it and keep looking over my shoulder at it until I decided it was probably safe. Anyway, not a second goes by and I get this feeling I should look behind me. I look and I see my ex-coworker walking towards me. I start running as fast as I could and the adrenal helped me get away. I didn't look back until I cleared some space between us and I didn't see him. Luckily, there were some men waiting for the bus at the end of the road, so I wasn't too worried he'd come running for me as I've seen him running. So a month goes by and I didn't see him, but I assumed he was on vacation as he showed up approximately a month later. Anyway, one night in early May, I was walking over to a grocery store to pick up some groceries I really needed after work as it was only 9 at night. So as I'm walking there, some guy wearing a hoodie comes up from behind me. He starts walking towards the bus terminal, but I guess he overheard my conversation to my boyfriend as I was telling my boyfriend that I was going to the grocery store to pick up some stuff and walking home. So I get to the grocery store and get my stuff. When I'm about to start walking home, I see some old looking guy dressed like a teenager standing outside of the grocery store. He was wearing the same clothes as the guy I saw earlier and he was watching me and trying to get close to me. I start telling my boyfriend to get me Uber instead and I walk over to some bags of fertilizer to hide from this guy, but he goes and starts looking for me. I stare at him, letting him know that I know he is up to something messed up. He stares back with these soulless eyes, and luckily then, my Uber showed up and I hopped in. I'm not sure if this guy has anything to do with my ex-coworker or if he was a random psycho, but I do know that it helped me look out, and it ended up saving me as I made my boyfriend meet me after work. After that, I was extremely paranoid and always on the lookout for creeps, and I made my boyfriend meet me after work if it was dark out. A few days later, after no bizarre events, my boyfriend comes and meets me when I see some car with its headlights on parked in front of a store we had to pass. We start walking by it when it slowly starts driving away, seemingly watching us walking away. We get to some lights, and I see the same car now in another plaza driving slowly and watching us. Freaked out, I tell my boyfriend and he gets scared. I assumed it was my ex-coworker as the car this time looked like his mom's car. I saw his mom come to pick him up at work once and she was driving a car that looked like this one. The next night, we also saw some man with a black van with the passenger door wide open hovering around it. When we passed him, he started to follow us, so we started to run a bit until we got farther away. 10 minutes later, I saw some guy wearing a hoodie hiding behind some building with his back against the wall. I don't know if the last two incidents are related, but it sure terrified me and my boyfriend. Mind you, I used to walk home by myself for a month without incidents, so I'm assuming once it was warm out, whoever had been watching me was planning something terrifying. And after this, I changed my hours at work even though my managers gave me a hard time despite all the insane stuff I was seeing at night. I got my managers to give me rides home anytime I had to close or I would get Ubers, but I never walked again at midnight or after 10 at night even with my boyfriend. Anyway, I ended up seeing my ex-coworker's car multiple times in May when my managers drove me home. Eventually, I stopped seeing his car as he realized I would never be out again at midnight. Anyway, I started getting morning shifts at work and I finally don't close anymore at work. However, I don't know if I'm done being stalked or not. Last month, the sun was starting to set at around 9 at night. I was walking by myself to the grocery store when I saw my ex-coworker drive past me. I ignored it as I've seen him in this area and it's probably unrelated. Anyway, 30 minutes later as I'm walking back with my boyfriend had gone to a store so my ex-coworker might have thought I was alone. I see the guy who was watching me in the parking lot in the same parking lot. He's back and lurking around. He sees my boyfriend and me and starts walking away but keeping an eye on us until we get into our apartment. Unfortunately, due to having in-person classes at my university, I'm back to working until 10 at night. But I have my boyfriend meet anytime I do. I'm worried it's all going to start back up again. I'm genuinely scared to be honest as this has been going on for almost a year. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This happened in 2000 or 2001. I had just moved to Southern California for college. My roommate and I, both males, early 20s, thought it would be fun to drive into Mexico because it was not that far away, maybe a couple hours, and we had never been. One set late morning, we made the drive into Tijuana, parked, and immediately hit a bar/restaurant. It was around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. We ate tacos and drank a lot of beer and tequila. We got pretty faded. I think we had cigars too. After a couple hours, we exited onto the street pretty drunk and in very good spirits. It was still daylight, maybe in the middle of the afternoon. I think our plan was to hang out a while longer and then drive back home at dusk once we sobered up a bit. We were approached on the street by a very friendly Hispanic male. He was very short, maybe 5'2", in his 30s in age, and stocky. He was literally dressed like Louis from Revenge of the Nerds, white dress shirt buttoned up all the way, tucked in, trousers hiked up high, floating socks showing, the whole thing. He was very friendly and presented himself almost as a tour guide. Hey, you guys not from around here, let me show you the local spots. Kind of presentation. My first impression was very friendly and we disregarded him and said no thank you. I did notice that although he was dressed like a stereotypical nerd, he had some pretty hardcore tattoos on his neck. Still was not scared of him, just didn't care for his service. We kept walking and were in a busy part of town with a lot of people, so really we're not concerned about him at all. But he kept on us just following us around trying to make chit chat about what bars or clubs were the best. It just seemed like he was a promoter or something. We were kind of aimlessly walking and he began to recommend different strip joints which we also disregarded. Slowly it seemed we were walking more into the outskirts of town unknowingly. I don't know how this happened, but he was always right there following us. I don't recall how, but he was finally able to get us interested in a strip joint. He pointed it out and said it was the best or something. Maybe just because he was relentless we agreed to walk over and go in. Oddly, we couldn't get in as my roommate didn't have his identification on him when we had just been drinking without issue. We ultimately walked away from this place and the follower began to ask if we had any interest in drugs, and he rattled off the name of a few. This was the first time he had mentioned drugs. Like an idiot, I said I was interested in a drug he mentioned. He said follow me, and then led us towards a nearby bar, which was now really on the outskirts of town. On the walk over, my roommate quietly asked me what was I doing buying drugs from this guy, but we continued. I told him it was fine. We walked into this bad 2-story bar, and he told my roommate to wait at the bar. He and I walked into the bathroom, but I recall going into a bathroom stall with him and him asking how much drugs I wanted. I said $20 worth, which was all the money I had on me. I gave him the 20 and the bathroom door opened shortly thereafter. Some other random guy came in and gave the tour guide a small bag of drugs, which he then gave to me. I looked at it quickly and it seemed legit. I put it in my pocket. Well, I guess it's time to get out of here, right? Well, this guy is kind of in my way, so I make a move to pass him and say thank you. He said something like, hold on a second, what about the 20 you owe me? I said I already gave it to you, and he reached into his pocket, I remember this clear as day, and pulled out a pathetic crumpled $1 bill and said, no, you just gave me a $1 bill. I got really scared. I told him I didn't have any more money, which was true. The bathroom door opened and my roommate walked in and began to use the urinal on the other side from us. I felt relief he was nearby. The tour guide was telling me something about does your friend have money? I told him I didn't know. The tour guide suggested that we go to the ATM. I agreed and told my roommate to follow us. We were now back on the street in daylight following him to an ATM. My roommate didn't understand what was going on. I was whispering to him to give me $20, but he was saying he didn't have it. He may have suspected something weird was going down. We were getting back into a part of town with more people on the streets, which was comforting. I kept asking my roommate to just give me $20 so I can get this guy off our back. He finally gave me the 20 just as we were nearing an ATM. I turned confidently to the tour guide, partly because there were more people around now, and gave him the 20 with a remark like here's the 20, now screw off. He immediately grabbed the 20 and shoved it into his pocket. He demanded more money. We began walking away from him in another direction but towards a populated shopping area. He stuck right behind us and was saying scary things I can't remember. He seized my right wrist where I had a watch on that cost about $150. I wrenched my arm away from him and we kept walking away at a brisk pace, now with a lot of people around. I quickly took the watch off and put in my cargo shorts pocket. We passed by a market and 2 Hispanic males exited in front of us and we passed them. The tour guide yelled to them and spoke to them briefly, and then all 3 were suddenly running at us. They pinned me to the wall off the sidewalk, and the tour guide approached and put a ballpoint pen to my neck. It hurt. One of them began looking for the watch and I stopped him and simply retrieved it and gave it him. Once this happened, they fought for it and my roommate, and I ran away. I looked back over my shoulder and they were literally fighting each other for this watch, a metal Swatch watch. We got to our car, tossed the drugs, and drove back across the border safely. Many years ago, before kids, rescue animals, a mortgage, and a husband, I was a travel writer in Europe. I did most of my trips alone, and this story is about the first time I visited Prague. I had never been to Prague and the trip was last minute, so I had little time to prepare. My travel partner had dumped me in another country and I was determined to make the best out of trip by visiting a place I'd never been. Upon arrival at the train station, I visited the accommodation office and asked for a hostel not far from the center. In my early 20s, winging it was part of the fun. These days I'm far less adventurous. The hostel they sent me to was a sprawling, crumbling, slate gray, art decoration building on a nondescript street about a 10-minute walk to Stairmesto. The inside was probably beautiful at one time, but by the time I checked in it was full of shabby, mismatched furniture and cheap stained carpet. Most of the light fixtures were broken, leaving everything but the lobby dark and gloomy. It smelled of standing water and dust. I found my room, a double for $12 per night, and made note of the fact that I had a roommate. She wasn't there, but on her side of the room there was a suitcase dressed neatly folded across the back of a plastic chair, a scattering of makeup containers on the beat-up desk, and a stack of German fashion magazines on the bed. As I had no plans or goals on this impromptu trip, so I spent the afternoon exploring Old Town Square, the Jewish Quarter, and Wenceslas Square. I purchased some Czech crystal for my mom and painted eggs from a street vendor for myself. I also made reservations for a sunset dinner cruise at 1 in the afternoon. At around 6 in the afternoon, I returned to my room to shower, change clothes, and unload my purchases. When I left my room about an hour later, there was no indication that my roommate had returned at any point during the day. After the cruise, I stopped at a tiny bar on Tinska and had a glass of wine. I'd heard horror stories about the dangers of Prague, but I felt no more trepidation than I did in any other large city. Sure, the cobblestone streets, fog rolling off the Via Tava, backlit Gothic architecture, and winding alleys made me think of Jack the Ripper and Dracula, but in a good way. It was nearly midnight when I returned to my hostel, so I was surprised to find that my roommate still hadn't returned. That wasn't uncommon, though. Backpackers are a fickle lot. She could have gone on a short overnight trip and just left her stuff behind, hooked up with a guy or girl, and was holed up at their place or hanging out at another hostel. So I was surprised but not concerned. I took another shower before bed, however, and was surprised to find that things in the room had changed up in my return. Her bed was neatly turned down, the magazines had moved to the nightstand, and the dress was gone. The strangest thing, though, was the addition of a pink silky nightgown spread across the bed, my bed. Maybe she thought she still had the room to herself. I didn't see how, though. My shopping bags, clothes, and toiletries were in plain view. I gently moved the nightgown over to her bed and then settled it for the night as I wrote in my journal. I assumed she was in the shower or somewhere nearby, so I expected her return shortly. After about an hour, though, her side was still empty. I needed to use the restroom before I went to sleep, so I made one last trip down the hall. The building was unusually quiet. There weren't the regular sounds of chatty backpackers, the clinking of glasses, or music that would normally leak through the walls. There was nothing. It was hushed, like a church after the congregation has left. I found myself practically tiptoeing back. My room was near the end of the hall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the corridor was darker than before. The few working lights were blinking as they struggled to stay lit, and it reminded me of a funhouse. A tightness began to fill my stomach, and I subconsciously quickened my steps. There wasn't a soul behind me yet. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, convinced I'd see someone gaining momentum on me. The only sound was the soft thud of my flip-flops as they struck my soles. I was flooded with relief as I flung open my door, but it didn't last long. Everything was exactly as it left it, except for the silky nightgown, which was now back on my bed. Sleep came at fits and starts. I left the lamp on for a while, still convinced my roommate would be right back, but the shadows it cast made the room even spookier. It was too dark with the light off. I'd finally slipped into a deep sleep when I suddenly heard the door open. A man stood in the darkened doorway, the hall light behind him showing just enough for me to see his contorted face. I didn't mean to, he sobbed. "You have to help me." Too confused and disoriented to be scared, I sat up, scrubbed at my eyes, and reached for the lamp switch. But once the room was light, I saw that the door was closed. There was no man. I quickly bounded off the bed and went for the door. It was locked. Nobody could have entered without a key. And the hallway, empty. I passed the rest of the night fully clothed, sitting up in bed, and with the light on. Though I'd paid for 2 more nights, at 7 in the morning I gathered all my stuff and went down to the reception desk to check out. By the way, I said to the 20-something-year-old receptionist, my roommate never returned. I'm a little concerned. She picked up the room key, looked at it hard, frowned, and then glanced at her computer. "What room were you in again?" When I repeated it to her, she looked back at her screen. "Ma'am, that room's been empty for 3 weeks and it's been cleaned since then. We only have 6 people in the whole building. The hostel has since been renovated and is now a luxury hotel." I realized that we didn't physically meet, but I thought it relevant since I seemed to have met someone. Someone entered and left my room. I live in a medium-sized apartment building in a fairly major city. While the neighborhood I live in is more on the safe side, gun violence is very high in my city as a whole, and we have a big trafficking problem. Despite this, I feel pretty safe going out, especially close to my apartment building where it is mostly well lit, and I am friendly with a few of the regular homeless people. Last night I got a reminder that my safety isn't guaranteed, and I have been pretty shaken since. Last night at around 12:20 I asked my partner if he wanted to share a joint with me, and when he declined, I locked the apartment and went downstairs myself. The exit I take spits me out on the main street where there is still the occasional car driving by at this time. Usually this type of human presence comforts me walking late at night, but tonight a lone black and dark blue van approached in my peripheral, and started to drive slowly, matching my walking pace until I rounded the corner and the van was stopped by a stoplight. I found it very strange at the time, but the van was on the other side of the street and there were 2 other cars, so I brushed it off. Around the corner there is a little food truck area with a bunch of picnic tables. They have like Christmas string lights hung up and a few other ambient lights that are kept on the whole night. but it barely illuminates the area. As I'm walking past the picnic tables, I notice a large man dressed in dark clothes sitting alone at one of the back tables. He was wearing a hood or hat, so I couldn't see his whole face, but his eyes followed me as I walked the border of the picnic area. My usual smoke spot is behind a fence on the other side of the picnic area. I was a little shaken by spotting that man, and also didn't want to upset him by smoking near him, so I chose a slightly further spot against the side of a construction vehicle. I lit my joint and start puffing away and reading something on my phone. I soon start getting this really uneasy sensation. It felt like all my hairs were standing up, and I got the most intense goosebumps I've ever felt. My phone was still playing music, and as I turned it off, I heard this shifting and rustling of gravel on the ground behind me. I swung my head around and saw a man reaching towards me with huge hands. I only caught a glimpse of his face before I fell to the ground. His eyes were wide, bulging, and extremely dark. They terrified me. His mouth was agape, and he was basically snarling at me. He scared me so bad I fell to the ground, stumbled, and broke into a run all in like 1 second. I ran for a few seconds before I peeked behind my shoulder and saw him a couple yards behind me. At this point, I saw it was definitely the man who was sitting at the picnic table, and I now saw he was wearing what looked like a dirty bucket hat slash fishing hat. He had shoulder-length dirty light colored hair and was way taller than me, so at least 6 foot. He was definitely gaining on me as I had lost ground by turning around, and I am not in the best of shape to begin with. I was about to reach the first entrance to the building, but the issue was one, there were double doors at this entrance that closed quite slowly, and two, the only way up was an elevator, so if he got inside with me I was out of luck. I kept running, taking my chances with my running ability versus quickly opening doors ability. I kept running along the other side of the building to get to the second entrance to the building. This one is just 2 single doors which open to the stairwell up to my apartment. It's above the second floor, that's all I'll say because I'm still scared. As I'm nearing this entrance, I see another man who appears to be speed walking directly towards me from the opposite direction. I should note that throughout this I have been hearing the growling slash snarling of the first guy behind me, and as the second man gets closer I hear he is also growling. I reach the keypad, unlock the first door, and quickly slam it closed behind me until I hear the lock click again. The second man reached the door first, and I saw his face more clearly as it slammed against the glass window of the door. He was also tall with longer hair, and I remember he was wearing overalls. But I mostly remember his wild eyes and his teeth that he gnashed at me right before I turned away, opened the second door, and booked it up the stairs. I didn't even stop until I was in my apartment, had all the doors locked, and was under the covers. I think in retrospect I didn't hear any sign of them following me up the stairs, but I was so convinced they were still on my tail. I think the only reason I got away from them was that they didn't know about this side entrance to my building, so they didn't expect me to keep running past the first entrance. I got up to get my inhaler, was having a near asthma attack at this point, and peeked out the window. My heart sank. I saw the same van that had creeped me out earlier parked across the street from the entrance to my building. The entrance is like right below my apartment window. I then looked down to see 3 men pacing along the side of the building, including the 2 that had chased me. I ducked down fearing they would see me. A few minutes later they start shining flashlights into the windows of apartments. At first I think of course it's only my apartment, but after a while it's clear they're just searching for me. At this point I try to call my building manager to let him know about the situation, and he sent out a text alert to our all building list. I was so paranoid another innocent person would be accosted by them, so I called the police. They told me they were on their way and to stay out of the window in case they were armed. A few minutes later the men are spooked by a faraway police siren and get in the van and peel away. I think it was from a different police call though, because when the officer arrived to our building the siren wasn't on. I spent a long sleepless night thinking they'd come back, but they never did. Definitely going to avoid being alone at night from now on. I asked one of the homeless guys I am friendly with if he saw anything suspicious last night, but he said he hadn't. They couldn't have been residents because they didn't leave after management sent that alert to us. The part that sticks with me the most is the growling and intense look in both their eyes. I don't know if they were on drugs or what. They never said any words to me or each other. Haven't heard any updates from the cops, but it's only been a few hours and they didn't seem that interested in my statement as the van had disappeared when they left. To the 2 men who growled at me and chased me into my apartment, let's not meet again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I went on a Tinder date some time ago while I was adjusting to a new city I had moved to. I didn't really know anybody there, so I used some online dating apps to see the dating scene around town. I landed one from a girl that seemed just like an artsy hippie type of girl. We had a few exchanges through the Tinder app and then decided to meet up for a drink. I picked her up at her house and she greeted me at the door and gave me a hug. She said the name of a local bar she wanted to go to for us to chat and get to know each other. I told her I would drive and proceeded to my car. The first red flag I noticed was when I walked to my car and opened opened the door, she had just followed me to the driver's side and was standing behind me staring. I looked at her blankly for about 15 seconds and asked her if she was going to get in. She said sure, I would love to. It went the long way to the passenger side around the back of the car. Since I had just met the girl, I figured she had just maybe smoked some weed or something, as I had kind of got the vibe she was a bit of a stoner. As I was driving to the bar, she talked in a very low voice, almost as if she was trying to whisper. I am not hard of hearing or anything, but I had to ask her to repeat herself several times just so I could make out the full sentences she was saying. When we got to the bar, I made sure we got a seat closer to the back away from most people, just so it could be a little quiet in order to hear her. The conversations honestly carried on as normal from this point, and it was actually a fun time for the time being. We talked about different things we were interested in, and she did bring up she did recreationally use weed and a few other tripping substances, like shrooms and such. I am not much of a fan of these, but it at least made me relax in the back of my mind to think maybe she was just high off marijuana, and that rationally explained some of the weird stuff of her behavior. Granted, I had a few drinks at this point, so I was honestly not thinking straight. I asked her if she wanted to go to my place after drinks, and she agreed. When we got to my place, we had a few more drinks, then she started talking about her jewelry. This is where it gets weird. She told me her jewelry was her big secret and it defined her. When I asked her why it was so important, she said, I'm actually Anastasia. I was never killed in Russia. My jewelry is my link to my past. It was hard for me to take that serious at this point with how much I drank, so I kinda challenged that statement using the little bit I knew about history. At this point, she freaked out and started yelling at the top of her lungs about how I don't respect ancestors and history. Then she got quiet and tiptoed right up to me and grabbed me by the neck. She then brought my face eye to eye with hers while still holding my neck. She says at this point, I am a shaman and I will curse you. My ancestors have destroyed many people and you do not respect that. You are from oppressive ancestors and they will be punished. Then she put her hand in a whiskey glass and made a cross on my face and kissed my forehead. At this point, I started to sober up a little. I talked her into calm me down, telling her I was only joking. Then she slowly started getting back to normal. Then she started talking about her cat fetish. She tells me she has a list of people who she tames to act as cats. I am not about judging people on their fetishes, so I listen in. She then tells me all the things she does to them and starts acting like a cat in my living room. If she had not yelled at me earlier on, I might have almost been turned on by it. My red flags in my head were tingling like crazy at this point, so I just listened and tried not to set her off. She noticed sage on my kitchen counter and asked me to let her light it and bless the house. Side note, I use sage to make my house smell better occasionally. It's kind of a ritual I like to do, but it's mine and mine alone, something I take very personally and like to do myself. I tell her no, she can't light it and that it's my thing to do on my own. Then she freaks out, telling me I am a horrible human being and screaming all over the place. I tell her I can take her home now and she runs to the door and goes outside. As I get outside, she is screaming at the top of her lungs that I am a horrible person and I should go die. I tell her she can walk herself home then, and I go back to my place and lock the door. She then starts banging on the door hard for about 10 minutes, saying she left her phone in there. I grab her phone off the kitchen counter and open the door to hand it to her. She tries to barge inside and I block her with my forearm. She then acts like she is about to punch me. I just hold my ground and tell her she is not coming in. She screams she wanted the whiskey bottle we were drinking from. I told her no, because I paid for it. I slam the door at that point and lock it. I hear her bang on the door for a minute. I then hear her footsteps going down the stairs. I waited about an hour and then went walking outside to see if she was still hanging around. I didn't see her, nor did I ever see her again after that. I hope to never see her again. In 2019, I bought my sister and I tickets to see 21 Pilots in Oklahoma City. At the time, I was a 20-year-old petite woman. I am a super fan of their music, so made my sister pack and be ready to line up at the venue around 2 to 3 in the morning to get decent spots in the pit. We got there and were greeted by other fans and had a pretty good time. I was able to park my car in a lot pretty close to the venue and got away with it until about 5 to 6 in the morning when police/venue management, I can't remember which, told us that anyone parked on that lot would be towed if not moved in the next hour. At that time, the venue management had made an actual line clear up to the door. My sister didn't have her license at the time and we were able to become acquainted with some of the people in line, so I felt comfortable for her to stay in line while I found somewhere new to park. Fast forward to me finding a Sonic that was close by and I figured I could get away with free parking. I started the close to a mile walk back to the venue. I then found an alleyway that looked to be one of those nightlife streets that are connected to bars. Since it was broad daylight and I knew I would save time going this route, I wasn't apprehensive about taking walking the alleyway back. About halfway through the alleyway, I saw a thin man no later than his 40s sitting at one of the bar's back patios. When he saw me, he made a joke about a pillow I was carrying. My sister had texted me and asked me to bring one back so she could take a nap before the concert. He then asked me where I was headed, in which I stupidly told him the concert downtown. He asked me if I wanted drugs, in which I replied no, and then asked if he could come with, which I lied and told him it was sold out. This entire exchange I kept walking while he was talking to hopefully shake him off or show no interest in the conversation. When I had reached the end of the alley, I had a bad feeling that I was being followed, so when I turned the corner I quickly jogged to hopefully gain some distance between us if that was the case. Unfortunately, I was correct. I remember hearing fast footsteps follow me behind me and then abruptly stopping when I turned to look behind me. It was almost like a movie where he would rush behind something when I turned, thinking I didn't see him. At this point I panicked and started trying to spot the closest store to me. It was around 5:30 to 6 in the morning at this point, so anything I did pass was closed, plus I was in a suburban area with more apartment buildings than stores. I turned another corner and saw a man was coming out of his home. I hurried up to the man and remember asking him if he could help me because I was scared and felt unsafe because there was someone following me. At this point the scrawny man from the alley had gained on me and was a few feet away from us. The man following me then began telling the guy I was asking for help that I was a liar and don't listen to her man. The guy coming out of his home then looked at me and then the creep and told me, "Sorry, I can't help you," and proceeded to close this door in my face. I have never to this day felt so utterly helpless in my life. I turned to the creepy guy and pled with him to please leave me alone. He kept telling me that I wasn't going anywhere and I wasn't going to no concert and a bunch of other threatening comments. By some luck, I was able to spot a group of people in 21 Pilots merch across the street and sprinted across and started walking next to them. I quickly told them what was happening and if I could walk with them to the venue, and they told me yes. I think the creepy man lost interest in me and I saw us walking slowly back in the opposite direction. I was able to make it back to the venue fine but immediately broke down upon seeing my sister. I thanked my new acquaintances and called the cops. I was told he does that a lot and he's not harmless. I was told by the venue's bodyguards that they would walk me to my car after the concert, but upon returning to the same spot for them to do so, they weren't there. To say I was pretty disappointed on how it was handled is an understatement. It still freaks me out to this day how easily I could have been taken or if I'd even be here to tell anyone this story. A couple of years before the pandemic started, a friend of mine, Mary, introduced me to a guy. He wasn't really my type, but she's one of those people who turns into a matchmaker when she's in a relationship, so I agreed to go on a couple of dates with him so she wouldn't feel as worried that I might die alone and so on. The first time I met up with this guy, it was a group date with Mary, her boyfriend Tim, and another friend and their boyfriend. This guy Mary was trying to set me up with, Joe, seemed alright. We talked, traded jokes, that sort of thing. I was comfortable with him because I wasn't interested in him. At the end of the night, he asked if we could meet up again sometime, and I agreed. Afterwards, I told Mary and she was delighted. Her boyfriend Tim was not very happy though. Tim's training to become a doctor. He's a very smart guy, and my friend said I greatly value his opinion. There's something off about Joe, Tim said, and I agreed, and Tim and I talked it over for a bit, but neither of us had seen or felt anything worse than a bit of weirdness. Be careful with Joe, Tim said, when I hugged my friends goodnight at the train station. Joe and I texted for a couple of weeks before we met up again, and those exchanges only cemented my first impressions. I just wasn't into him, and something about him was off. He began to reveal a side of himself that was less friendly as well. He had very low self-esteem and was always looking for reassurance. At first that wasn't so bad, but it turned toxic pretty quickly. He seemed to get off on that sort of attention. I didn't really want to go out with him again, but Mary was really invested in the idea of Joe and I getting together. Mary is a sweetheart, but she doesn't really have any instincts. Occasionally that gets me or someone else in our friend group into trouble. Mary's cute and everyone wants to make her happy. She has good intentions, but because she has no instinct, she can't sense danger and sometimes drags people into dangerous situations unwittingly. I was hoping this was not going to be one of those episodes. Anyway, Mary was excited about the next date, and Joe kept asking when I was going to meet him again, so I invited Joe to an event my hobby club was holding. I figured that was safe because we'd be surrounded by people I knew well. The evening was alright. Joe wasn't as creepy in person as he had been over text messages lately. After the event, we walked along the river for a bit, on a walkway crowded with families and tourists. We parted ways at a busy train station. I figured I'd just gently push this thing further into the realm of platonic and everything would be alright. Then, on one night a couple of weeks later, Joe called me and told me he was going to off himself. I freaked out and tried to calm him down. I stayed up all night talking to him, from when he called around 10 at night until the sun rose. Every time he calmed down, I tried to say goodbye, but he kept saying that if I hung up he would off himself, himself, so I stayed on the line, talking him down over and over again. Something about the situation felt wrong, but what else was I going to do? I wouldn't leave anyone to end themselves. As I sat on my patio, watching the sun rise over the forest behind my house, he finally let me off the hook. He said thank you, and for a moment I felt that I'd done the right thing. Maybe I just saved a life. Then, Joe said, with a voice full of glee, that was the best night of my life, and hung up. I was stunned. But had this psycho really kept me up all night, knowing full well the next day was going to be busy for me, just to get off on the attention? I decided there was no way I was ever going to see this guy again. I told Mary what had happened, and she was very apologetic. She agreed that Joe was a complete psycho, said she was sorry she had set me up with him, and told me to call the cops if he came to my house. I didn't think he would. Joe didn't have my address, and neither did the person Mary had met him through. I don't give out my address to anyone but trustworthy family members because I don't want my abusive ex-step-parent to find me. That precaution probably saved me from a much worse experience. As it was, when I broke it off with Joe, he took it pretty badly. He threatened to end himself again, so I messaged Mary and she contacted her and Joe's mutual friend, who kept an eye on Joe for a few days. Not long after that, I started getting creepy phone calls after midnight. They were often at 2 or 3 in the morning. The caller never said anything, just breathed heavily down the line. It was so unnerving. I blocked the number every time, and Joe must have gone through 4 or 5 numbers before he switched his phone to a private number to get around caller identification. I couldn't block him anymore. I didn't know what to do. For more than a year and a half after Joe got a private number, I was forced to answer every one of his calls. A whole branch of my family had private numbers because one of them was scammed a while back. Luckily, the police caught the scammer and they didn't end up losing any money, but unfortunately for me, that meant that if I received a call from a private number at night, I had to pick it up, just in case something had happened to a member of my family. On one particular night, my phone went off at 3 in the morning. It was a private number. I knew it was probably Joe. I was staring at my phone, trying to work out what to do. I never let the calls go to voicemail, because apart from the whole family issue, even if he didn't know where I lived, he certainly knew where Mary and Tim's house was. I was afraid that if I didn't play along, he might go after my friends. The phone was still ringing, and I reached out to swipe up and answer the call, then paused. I had an idea. Back when I was in high school, my dad would sometimes call early in the morning. If no one else was in the house, I'd be woken up, stumble over to the phone half awake, and answer it with a slightly croaky voice. I have a low voice for a woman, so every time I answered the phone like that, my dad would mistake me for my brother, John. I realized that I could use that. I cleared my throat, dropped my voice as low as I could, then said hello. I was delighted with the result. I sounded exactly like John. It was uncanny. It made me a little sad, really. John died about a year before I met Joe. It was a bit of a jolt, hearing something so close to his voice again after almost 3 years. I quickly grabbed my phone before it could ring out, tapped the answer button, then said that deep hello again. This time there was no creepy heavy breathing, only silence. I said another deep hello. After a moment's pause, Joe hung up on me. I was overjoyed. Every other time, I'd had to hang up on him. No matter what I said before, he had always wanted as much of my time as he could get. I let myself feel a flicker of hope. Maybe I was free. It's been over a year now, and it looks like I am free of Joe. I haven't gotten any creepy calls since I pulled out my John impersonation, and I can only guess that Joe thinks I've changed my number, or given it to someone else. Joe never met John, so when I said hello, he probably just heard a young man's voice. If John were still here, I know he'd approve. If I could tell him now, he'd be very happy to know a part of him could still protect me, even so many years after he was gone. I've heard from mutual friends that Joe has said some awful things about me. He's told some people he slept with me, which he didn't, of course. Who would sleep with someone that creepy? Worse than that, Joe and Mary's mutual friend has said that Joe told her he wants to kill me. Mary and I were horrified by that. The friend has since told him I've moved to another city, so that might be enough. She's very close to him, distantly related actually, so he believes what she tells him. When I'm done with my studies, I'm going to move across the country. Until then, I'm keeping my head down. My campus and Joe's are a 30-minute train ride apart. That's nowhere near far enough away, but it will have to do. There is one positive thing that has come out of this. Mary is now completely cured of any desire to play matchmaker. Oh, and Joe, let's never meet again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. The following events took place over the space of a year. It took me a while to link them all and realize what had happened, so I'm going to try and relate it as I experienced it. I'm 31 now, but this took place when I was roughly 18. For the majority of my career, I've been a support worker. This involves supporting adults with learning disabilities/health issues in their own homes and out in the community, basically with all and any aspects of their lives. The job involves long hours and often sleepovers or waking nights. In this case, the other two staff members went home at 8 at night or 10 at night depending on if the service users were overnighting at their parents', which was a regular occurrence, and the sleepover would stay with the remaining clients in case they had a health concern or needed support with something overnight. At the time, I was working in a service with 3 young men who were very active within their community. This meant I was also very active in their community, out and about all the time helping them to and from work during college/work/recreational. We got the bus a lot because they had concession passes. I live in the United Kingdom and can't drive, so I commuted to and from work on public transport. Keep a watch, the service we worked in was based across the road from a nursing home or possibly a respite center. To this day, I'm unsure what it actually is/was. This building had parking spaces outside it intended for that facility, but after certain hours anyone could use them. At 10 every night I was on shift. Whether I was a sleepover or finishing for the day, a car would park across from us and shine its high beams right through our window. This would also light up the adjacent front door, so anyone interested could see who was leaving. Even though the clients were in bed by this time, there was still a lot to do for the remaining staff member, like ensuring the property was secured and the fire doors throughout the house were closed. Just general health and safety things. So a car across the road blinding our staff as they left was low down on the list of concerns. Personally, I assumed that it was also the facility staff going home. 10 at night is a normal finishing time in the care sector. This went on for a few months before one eagle-eyed colleague told me this only happened on days when I would come into work. We made a joke about how I had a fancy man picking me up, but I wrote it off. Charting my movements, not really an event, but whilst out and about with the people I supported, they would often say my name, "That man is looking at you." My service users were young men who liked a joke and had limited mental capacity, so often their jokes did not seem like jokes but were intended as such. This started with one client specifically. I worked with him more than the others because I was his key worker, which meant I had additional duties relating to that client, which included arranging special outings/events. But before long they were all telling me there was a man who was staring at me/following me. They often said this in crowded public areas, and because they struggled to communicate they could never describe him fully, but one of them said it was always the same man, and they gave the odd vague detail which we pieced together into a wider description and will be relevant later. Again, the other staff found it odd this behavior was only directed at me. They never said this to anyone else, though they did say it in the presence of other staff if I was part of the group. The escalation. This event had such an impact that I still don't use public transport alone in the evening. I got a call from the mother of the person I was supporting that day. He had earlier gone for a visit to his parents and his brother was home from university, so they decided he would sleep over so he could spend the following day with his brother. It was 7:30 in the afternoon and dark because it was winter. I had worked over my contracted hours that month as we were short-staffed, so I called on our call manager who offered me an early finish. I did all the admin care quality commission work required us to do daily, cheerily said goodbye to everyone before leaving to catch the 8 at night bus. It had been laundry day, so I had been ironing and hadn't eaten the food I had brought with me. I called my partner at the time, and because I had to pass through the city center, I decided to grab us a chicken bucket and pick up the newest Dance of Dragons book, which I had pre-ordered from Waterstones as it was December and the shops were open late for Christmas. I got off the bus, wearing my headphones as usual, picked up the book, walked down to the fast food place to get the bucket of chicken, which was next to the metro, underground/subway station, got my food and was on my way down the steps to the ticket barrier. Halfway down the steps I had a tap on my shoulder. I had my hands full of chicken, so turned, unable to take my headphones out, to see a man who I assumed was asking about which line he should be on or something. Anyway, I tried to brush him off, but he followed me to the barrier. He bought a ticket, but I had a pass, which I scanned, but he ran down the escalator to catch up with me. As I was sitting on the platform, he sat next to me. It was late and people were sparse and spread out. It was super uncomfortable that he had all this space and chose to invade mine. Having a seat for my chicken, I took a headphone out because he seemed angry with me. He was rambling, but in a nutshell he told me he has seen me about often with different men, people I was supporting I assume. Sometimes I'm in a group with people much older. I assume my co-workers as I was the youngest employed there. stare. He said a lot of odd things which didn't actually register as creepy until I got home. He said I live on road I work on and often go between 2 houses. At the time we had another service a few doors up again with 3 young men. That was my original service, but it was better conditions at my current service, so I had hopped over when they needed staff. It was ran by the same company. As I knew the service users, I'd often cover there if they needed me, rather than call agency staff. He described my commute, including times, the clothing I wore, which was dress code, that I was either with someone or had headphones in. He said my hair changed a lot. I had semi-permanent colors that I changed regular. There was a lot that looking back indicated he had been watching me a while, but I was tired, and he was rambling, and I wanted him to go away. He was inexplicably angry at me, and saying he just wanted to look after me, and I kept ignoring him. This was the first time I had ever seen the man. I can't remember how I responded exactly, but I basically told him he had the wrong person. However, it did freak me out enough that I changed lines in metros a few times. I was on the phone to my partner the whole time after I got on the metro. He followed me at first, at a distance, next car over, but eventually lost track of me. He was unable to describe anything I did after the city center, so I think this was the first time he had followed me beyond my changeover from bus to metro. I did end up safely at home that night, but over an hour late with cold chicken. I told my manager about this and she gave me a personal alarm. I hadn't yet connected it to prior events, so I just let it go thinking it was a one-off. Final event. I was either not at work or on annual leave and only have a vague recollection about hearing about this event. In fact, I had forgotten it entirely until a coworker at the time, a current friend, reminded me. It took place at a vulnerable person's home. 2 of my coworkers were upstairs sorting out medication. They came down to find a man the same ethnicity, and later we confirmed it was the same general description as my stalker. He was sat at the table. The guys we supported were in their rooms, so downstairs had been empty. As you can imagine, they were quite shocked. This was a secure service that protected vulnerable adults. He had managed to bypass multiple doors, all of which were both locked and alarmed. He was just sitting in silence looking around the room. We still don't know how he got in, but he didn't respond to their questions and after a while just got up and left without saying a word. This obviously got reported, but nothing was really done about it. The company was one of the first I worked for, so I didn't know better, but it's just generally bad. At the time, the other staff assumed he was an agency staff member who maybe had the wrong house and was meant to go to the other service a few doors up. But he didn't present them with identification when asked. I'm not sure why they didn't call the police because I would have. Shortly after this event, I got offered a new job in a different city, meaning I left the area entirely for about 5 years. I now live back in the same vicinity but different area and with a different name through marriage. I also look a lot different now. I have never seen the man again. I can't prove these events were connected, just that the description of the man was consistent across them all. After the metro incident, I started getting taxis home because I was so afraid, which I still do if I'm out late. I'm now also extra vulnerable as I myself am now disabled. Luckily, I work a 9 to 5 job which is based at home since the pandemic. I have the worst luck, and a good bit of traumatic experiences I've dealt with throughout my life. 2022 was no different, and the year started out awful when the heat lamp from my pet frog caught on fire and started a nasty fire in my bedroom. Due to the smoke damage throughout the house, and me having nowhere to sleep, my parents and I were put into a 2-bedroom suite at a residence inn in the next town over, a quiet medium-sized town with little to no crime while the house was gutted and renovated. We lived in this hotel from January 5th to late October. It's actually a town known for being a more wealthy, stuck-up type. The hotel was nice, but I am used to living in a pretty woodsy and rural neighborhood where I don't hear too much going on. I'm not used to apartment living, but having access to a pool, hot tub, fire pit, and nice propane outdoor kitchen that people rarely use was very nice. About a month after the fire, I ended up getting a part-time job 5 minutes away from the hotel and started dating my coworker. The story starts that my boyfriend and I got out of work around 12 at night, and then hung out with our friend until we decided to all head home at around 12:50. My mom texted me asking where I am, which I didn't reply because I would be there in less than 5 minutes. It was driving, and she would probably see me before I could even enter the hotel through the door near our room because most nights she would stand out there on the phone with a friend, or on Facebook, drinking a Truly and chain smoking. She mainly did this because she's a night owl, like me, and the walls inside the hotel room were like paper. My dad had to get up every morning at 5 for work, and we would both give her an ear for talking on the phone late at night with friends or watching videos, as no matter what volume she talked at, we could hear her. When I pulled into into the parking spot. I walked up to my mom and she starts telling me off for not replying to her quickly enough because something was going on. I asked her what happened because of course we already had witnessed some weird behavior at the hotel before. Basically, when she had gotten home, due to most of the parking spaces up against the building being taken, she parked in the overflow lot for the hotel in a car that was sitting there peeled off as soon as she went in park, with their lights off. She went inside, dropped off her purse and other items, and went outside to smoke and noticed the same car was again parked next to hers, Eileen. She told me she had been standing there, drinking her drink, leaning up against the wall, watching videos on her phone when she heard footsteps approach. She looked up and there was a man there who was staring at her, and she stared back. He ended up walking a little bit down the walkway and then raised his fist up at a first floor window and smacked it, possibly attempting to break it. My mom, who unfortunately is not afraid of anything but spiders, yelled, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he said something about trying to open a beer bottle. He had no bottle in his hand, and alarm bells were going off for my mom, so she just yelled, "Okay, I'm calling the cops." And he started sprinting down the side of the building away from her and around the corner. My mom started to follow him once he rounded the corner of the building, and when she got to the corner he was gone. There was an older couple, probably late 50s or early 60s, who would frequently sit on the curb by that door that he rounded the corner on drinking, and the woman asks my mom what she thinks is up with that guy, and my mom was like, "I have no clue. Did you see him doing anything?" And the lady then told my mom that he had sat down with them for like an hour, basically being like, "Oh, I have nowhere to stay tonight. I have nowhere to go. I have no money." It was trying to convince them to let him stay in their hotel room tonight. She basically said he was acting cracked out of his mind. Only like 30 seconds has passed when my mom hears his car start and he peels out of the overflow lot again. This time lights on. She walks back over to the door closest to our room and continues smoking. Not even 3 minutes later, he pulls into the overflow lot again and starts walking down the walkway and passes my mom, staring at her. My mom said something like, "This is getting ridiculous. I'm going to call the cops on you." And he just said okay. He kept walking past her. This is at the point where I had pulled into my parking spot and my mom was telling me all of this. I hear footsteps in the parking lot and I see a tall man in khaki shorts and a hoodie walking into the overflow lot, and my mom is telling me that's him. That's him. So I take a video of him in case I need evidence or something. He had apparently been walking around the building again, then got in his car and left again. My mom had called the non-emergency number because we were on the ground floor and she didn't want to try to come back and break one of our windows for our room. The police department is actually across the street from the hotel and they said they would come by and take a look, yet no one has come. I use weed to help me get tired and a bit less anxious for bed. I decided to go to the door on the other side of the building, which was a bit more sheltered, and also because I didn't want my mom to see me smoking weed. Even if she knew I was doing it, it felt weird to be doing it in front of her. I sit down on the curb of the walkway and light up, texting my boyfriend about all of this when I hear a car door close behind me. I look out into the lot and don't see any headlights or anything, but I'm not too worried because again, it's a hotel, lots of people get dropped off and come by late at night. I start scrolling through Twitter and hear a loud roar from a bed. I get up, already shaking, and look around, and I see his Volkswagen Golf parked about 10 feet away from me. The lights in the car are on, and there's a bunch of smoke in the car. He's rooting through stuff in his backseat, making sounds like an animal and just talking gibberish. I immediately call my mom and start walking down to the other end of the building where she is, and she's looking at me head on and tells me to run through the phone and don't look back. Apparently at that point he was walking behind me quickly. By the time I get to her, I turn around and he's already walking back. I'm so shaken my mom said screw this and calls the police this time, because it's now been around 35 minutes and no officer has come from just dialing the police department. An officer comes 10 minutes later, which I recorded on my phone, and tells us that she actually had responded to the first call, and at that point he had gone to an ATM, gotten cash, and bought a room for the night at our hotel. She said she personally talked to him herself. She has a bit of an attitude with my mom. I'm now listing this completely based off of the recording, who after my mom had said, "Do you not see the odd behavior?" And the cop literally went, "It's not illegal to have odd behavior, ma'am. He is a guest to her." And my mom says he's acting like he's on drugs. And the cop said he may be. It's not illegal to be on drugs. It's only illegal to possess them. That was the most outrageous thing I ever heard. If he's high, it's only if he's possessing them that I can take criminal action. To which my mom replies, "Well, clearly if he's high, he's most likely got drugs in his possession. Don't you think?" The cop then basically said she understood my mom's concerns, and while his behavior is a little bizarre, the attempted window smashing is a he said she said, and because he is now a paying guest she cannot go against the matter any further and leaves. My mom and I are inside for the night in our room, and in my bedroom I kept the window cracked because the air conditioner wasn't the best, and I heard him walk around the building time and time again until I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up around 7 in the morning, he was gone. I have so many other creepy stories staying at this place, and it really is shocking if you knew what town it was. I would witness drug deals going down at 3 in the morning when we first started staying there, and I lived on the 3rd floor, people engaging in affairs. One night I had got over to my aunt's house, which was about 35 minutes away, and on the way home had a friend on the phone to keep me company. I pulled into a parking spot right at the door, and it was around 9:30 at night. I was just sitting there for about 5 minutes when I saw a man's silhouette walking down the walkway slowly, coming closer to my car. I didn't think much of it because people walk their dogs a lot at night or go out to smoke, but then he slowed way down as he got to my car and stood directly in front of the hood, staring at me through the windshield. I stared back, but I couldn't see anything besides the black silhouette and the end of the cigarette lit, and just said to my friend, "There's a guy just standing, like right outside my car staring at me," and she yelled, "Text her dad. Text her dad right now." I'm assuming he had heard my friend, because he then swiftly walked around the corner and disappeared. My dad came running down the stairs. Bless him, because at that point we were on the 3rd floor, and by the time he had come running out, the man was gone. At that point, my parents wouldn't even let myself out at the pool and hot tub area by myself anymore because they noticed that the hotel was being used for human trafficking with pimps and so on. They wanted me to text them as soon as I arrived to the hotel and not dilly-dally in the parking lot. Just get inside and keep a close eye on my surroundings. Again, really surprising for that area. I'm thankful I'm back in my house, where the only sounds I hear at night are bears or raccoons trying to root through my trash, and I hope I never have to live in a hotel ever again. Background information: this happened at a travel hockey tournament. I've never had an experience like this before, so it was shocking as somebody who has been playing for 13 years. At the time, I was a 13-year-old girl. However, at 13, I gained the privilege of being able to walk around in public without having an adult's eyes on me 24/7. In hindsight, probably not the best decision of my dad. I was on a team this year, and all of the kids were 13 to 14 years old. We were headed down nearby DC for a tournament in December. Our team manager booked a hotel that was in the projects. I'm talking hearing a gunshot and seeing abandoned houses nearby when I pulled into the parking lot of this hotel. This was already a red flag, but I continued to unload my suitcase from my dad's truck and grab my backpack too. As we were headed towards the doors of the hotel, I heard a man behind me calling some girl's name. I think he was screaming Annie or something that sounded like that. I turned around just to see if he was anywhere near us, and he was standing next to a large pillar connected to the hotel. This man had bloodshot red eyes and was definitely on some sort of substance. I decided to start walking faster, and my dad must have thought the same thing as me because we started hightailing it to the hotel doors. Less than a minute had passed once we reached the hotel doors, probably about 10 seconds. I decided to look back to see if this man was still there, but he disappeared. Eventually, my teammates all texted the group chat saying they had arrived and they were hanging down in the lobby. I rushed to the elevator to go join them. I clicked the start button, which leads to the lobby, but when the door opened, it wasn't the lobby. The elevator had taken me to the basement. I was frightened because it kind of looked like the back rooms except tile flooring, with some 60s music playing faintly. I took a peek outside the elevator door and there was absolutely nobody in sight. I tried the start button again, absolutely horrified from that. I didn't feel myself go up or down. The door opened to the basement again. I figured maybe the start button was the basement and it was just different from other hotels. Maybe I just had made a mistake and was supposed to press floor 1 to get to the lobby. I hit the floor 1 button. This time it took me to a hallway. The button led me to the first floor of hotel rooms, still not taking me to the lobby. At this point, I started to get confused and an eerie feeling overcame me. I decided to head back onto the elevator, go to my floor, the 3rd floor, and walk down the stairs. I knew my entire team was roomed on the 3rd floor, so I felt more comfortable walking down the stairs from there. I went up to floor 3 and got off of the elevator. On my way to the stairs, I saw weird crumbs in front of a hotel door and bent down to take a look at what it was. It was weed on the floor. I was kind of taken aback a bit and fell back. The person on the inside must have heard me because the door opened. The crazy man from the parking lot was the one behind the door. After seeing this, I bolted to the stairwell and ran down the stairs. I was running so fast that I was skipping some steps. I even ended up accidentally tripping at one point, but I got up as fast as my little legs could carry me. I made it down to the lobby and my team saw me in a panic. They all asked me what's wrong and I explained my story. I got a few looks from them and they probably thought I was delusional, but one of the boys convinced the whole team to follow me onto the elevator so I could show them in person what happened. I clicked the start button and lo and behold, behold, the door reopened without any movement from the elevator. This was the same elevator and same button I had pressed previously. I still have no explanation behind this. The weekend ended up continuing but being completely normal until we had to leave for our last game. We all were standing in the lobby about to leave. We walked out into the parking lot to see that one of the cars had been broken into, and it was my teammate's. This car had a back window that was pretty big, so you could see what was inside of the trunk. Well, turns out that somebody had broken into the vehicle thinking it was full of something valuable. The only thing left behind in the trunk was both of my teammates' sticks, so he definitely wasn't looking for equipment. Jokes on him though, because hockey equipment smells absolutely rancid, and he probably had a not so nice surprise when opening up the bag. The hotel workers actually checked the cameras, and guess who it showed? The crazy man from the parking lot. So crazy man, let's not meet. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I've been holding onto this story for years now and would like to finally get it off my chest. So my sibling and I lived close to an elementary school where we would often go to walk our dog in the playing field in crop of woods, or we would let our dog roam around while we played on the playground or made pretend in the woods. I think I was around 14 when this happened, about 10 years ago. This schoolyard had a playing field, a playground near the building, and a playground farther away from the building in a crop of trees. We were swinging on the swing set at this more distant playground, but from this play area you can clearly see residential streets and the parking lot of the school, which kind of all wrap around the crop of forest. As we are swinging, I see an SUV drive up one of the roads and pull into the parking lot. It's a weekend, so there is no other cars around and not very many people, maybe the odd passerby also walking their dog through the school grounds. The SUV is about 40 meters or 130 feet away from where we are, and I wear glasses, so I can't see very well what the people look like as they exit the car, but I can see some distinct clothing pieces. There are 3 people. 2 look older and are dressed as if they are older middle-aged, like in their 50s. I remember one of these people was wearing a wide-brimmed women's sun hat. The third person looks like an older teen or young adult in his 20s and is wearing a green and white striped jersey and cleats. It is not uncommon for people to walk or drive to the school to use its field for play or sport practice, though looking back now I realize it is odd they parked in this lot and not on the side of the road nearer to the field, which is on the opposite side of the property. In any case, I think okay, just some grandparents and their grandson going to practice in the field and go about playing with my sibling. I remember watching the trio walk away around the school building, completely opposite to where we were on the property. We have our dog with us, and after a time we decide to stop swinging and take the dog on a walk through the trails in the forest brush. Maybe 15 to 20 minutes have passed since the car pulled up. The brush we are walking in is basically in the very corner of the school property. There is a metal chain link fence in front of us, and beyond it is the sidewalk, a residential road. To our right is another fence which separates people's backyards from the school grounds. These homes all have tall trees growing along the school fence for added privacy, so it's almost impossible for anyone to see into the schoolyard. My sibling and I were just at that age where playing pretend didn't really feel genuine and spur of the moment, like we were about to grow out of it. I'm feeling bored but don't want to go home yet, so I pick a branch of these red berries that grow in the schoolyard and say to my sibling, hey, wanna play a game? Which was our code for let's play pretend, and I bend down to offer the berries to my dog as a starting point for the game. They've never hurt her. I'm still speaking to my sibling, who is walking in front of me as I bend down, but my voice trails off as I see my dog's behavior. She is completely ignoring the berries and me, and is instead moving past me slowly, ears back and nose pointed, as if she is approaching something. I follow her movements, still looking down, and when I finally look up, there are the 3 people from the SUV not 2 meters, 6 feet in front of me. They are certainly not a couple of grandparents and a kid, but 3 grown men. I remember the faces of the 2 older men pretending to be grandparents. The foremost man had short white hair and a white scruff of facial hair. His mouth was open in a faint shape as he breathed quietly and focused on keeping his steps light. The other man was extremely thin, his cheekbones popping out in shoulder length. Greasy brown hair hung around his skeletal features. They had crept up behind my sibling and I silently and remained just as quiet as they all turned their backs quickly and pretend to point off into the trees like they were bird watching or something. It was bizarre how silent the whole encounter was. I immediately realized we need to get out of there and turn my attention back to my sibling as I grab my dog's collar and get her hooked up to the leash. My sibling is about a foot from me but seems oblivious still to the 3 creeps in the woods right behind us. I tell them over and over that we need to leave, but they become wrapped up in the imaginary game I proposed moments ago. Finally, they see the men. I never look back at the creeps, only to my sibling. My sibling also stops talking and starts walking with me. Thankfully, an opening in the fence between these now haunted woods and the road is only a few meters ahead ahead, and we get some distance and obstacles between us and these creeps. To my frustration, my sibling wants to stop on the sidewalk and pick some more berries through the fence, and I frantically tell them to come on. Let's go. I still never look back towards the men, my vision tunneling to the safety of the open roads and sidewalks and homes in front of us. We get home without incident, at least to my knowledge. Had the men followed us on foot, going back to their car and followed it, or simply gave up. I didn't care, I just wanted to get home, which was only a couple blocks away. When we got home, I broke down as I told my mom what happened, and I remember her reaction being kind of nonchalant. I had always been an anxious child, and she had developed a habit of downplaying things in a kind of exposure therapy way. I realized I still didn't feel fully safe with this reaction and retreated to my basement to cry alone. In recounting the story with my mom years later, she said she did call the police, but nothing came of it. I am also very thankful for my dog, as it is likely she saved the lives of myself and my sibling that day. This story happened to me back when I still lived at my parents' house. I was commuting to college at the time and had 3 siblings that also lived at home, my brother and 2 sisters. For some context, we lived on 5 acres in rural Ohio, surrounded on both sides by woods and farm fields. Additionally, during the week, my dad normally left for work at 2 in the morning, so I had always felt like it my job to be the man of the house because he was gone during the times when you would imagine something sketchy happening. However, on this night, because it was the weekend, my dad was home. I woke up to the sound of my brother's voice trying to get my attention. We had separate rooms upstairs, and coming out of our rooms you could look down over the banister and to see our front door. When I woke up, it took a few moments to get out of the haze and realize what was going on. I looked at the clock and it was around 2:30 in the morning, and my brother told me there were 2 men at our front door. Now this really woke me up. We quietly walk out of my room and peek over to look down at the front door. When we looked, there was no one at the door, but I noticed my parents off to the side, out of view of the glass on the front door. I whispered down to my dad, and he told me there were 2 guys who had been talking to each other and knocking on the door. Hearing my dad say this freaked me out even more. I went back into my room and grabbed my pistol, quickly shuffling down the stairs after looking to make sure they weren't at the door. If they had been, they would have easily seen me coming down the stairs, as it is in direct view of the door. My brother is right behind me as we head over to where my parents are, whispering to try and find out what is going on. My parents had awoken to the sound of our dog barking and had come out to find these 2 men knocking loudly at the door. At this point, the men return and begin knocking again, despite the fact that no one had come to the door and our dog was still actively barking. The fact that they were there at this time, in a location where houses are spread out hundreds of yards, and still knocking with a dog barking, made the situation even more terrifying. After a couple of minutes, the men walked away, and we all shuffle across the kitchen into the family room to peek out the windows into our driveway, which is lit up by our outside light. There was a black Cadillac sitting there, but no one was inside from what we could see. Immediately the question was, where did these guys go? They were in their car and they were no longer at the front door. Unfortunately, we figured out the answer when the handles on our back French door started jiggling. They were actively trying to enter the back of our house, which enters into the kitchen. At this point, I just remember my mom frantically saying David to my dad as pure terror overwhelmed her. Then 2 things happened. Adrenaline filled my body as I prepared my handgun, horrified at the very real possibility that I might have to shoot these men. Secondly, my dad finally grabbed the phone, called the police, and calmly told them what was happening. Thankfully, after a minute of jiggling, they stopped at the back door and disappeared again, only to return to their knocking at the front. However, at this point, several minutes had gone by and suddenly we saw the local police fly up in multiple cruisers with their lights on. As they whipped into our driveway and front yard, the 2 men bolted away, attempting to run the long way around the house across the driveway. One of them disappeared out of our view, but the other one was intercepted by an officer yelling for him to get on the ground. He didn't, and he was immediately tased and fell on the ground. Some of the officers went around the house after the other guy, and one of them came to talk to my dad and I as we came out the front. They ended up finding the other man hiding in my sister's little playhouse in the backyard. It appears both of them were drunk and or high, as the one who hid had cocaine on him. While they were both arrested that night, we never did find out what they were charged with or what happened to them. Needless to say, the whole experience wasn't fun, so random men at our door in the middle of the night, let's not meet again. My parents had purchased a condo about 10 minutes from their home around the time my older brother was born, with the intention that my siblings and I had the option of renting it when we become of age. I moved in alongside my brother a few weeks after my 18th birthday, exhilarated by the freedom from our childhood home. which had become laden with traumatic memories over the years. The move took 2 or 3 days, and we had a U-Haul coming in and out of the driveway during that time. My first day of college occurred a few days later. I had a full schedule 3 days a week, which I would later regret, with my last class getting out at 6 in the afternoon. The city I live in is notorious for heavy traffic, and I would not get home until roughly an hour and a half later, despite the university being less than 15 miles away. The sun was mostly down by the time I turned into my street, and there were a few people, some accompanied and well known, taking their evening strolls. There was nothing remarkable about it. The driveway was occupied, so I parked on the street and made my way home. The following day, I got off my closing shift at 9 at night. It was dark by the time I got home, and there was a man walking on the strip of sidewalk that faces the condo. I would not have noticed that he was the lone man from the evening before if it was not for him wearing the same outfit: a bright yellow hoodie, black nylon track pants with white pinstripes, gray Nike trainers, and a tan baseball cap. As I got out of my car, we shared a quick glance and continued on our ways. 2 days later, I got off my closing shift and picked my, now ex-boyfriend up for a date. We went back to the condo so that I could change, and in the dark, I saw the man again, wearing the same outfit and on the same strip of sidewalk. It's him again. I sounded more surprised than suspicious, and my boyfriend was confused. I explained that I had been seeing him walking around and that he was always wearing the same thing. We got out of the car and stared at him, our bodies turned toward him. He ducked behind a car, now properly freaked out. We got back in my car and watched him get into his and drive away with his lights off. It was too dark and he was too far away for us to catch a license plate. At this point, I was not sure if this man even lived in the neighborhood. We went about our night, and I dropped my boyfriend back off at his parents' house. He told me to call him and or the police if I saw the man again, and I agreed. I got home around midnight. The man was a street away from his usual spot, crouching below a tree and hugging his knees under his chin. I drove past him and noticed a different man in a blue flannel and jeans approaching a street light. He got under the illuminating glow and pulled his phone out, attempting to make a call. I was unsure if the two men had any association with each other until I looked back over at the yellow hoodie man. He was no longer under the tree. He was also under a street light a few meters away from the tree. His back was turned to me, but it appeared as though he was taking a call. As I looked back and forth between the two men, it became pretty obvious that they were communicating with each other. I drove away and called the police. They told me to stay where I was or go to another safe location, and that they would contact me when the matter was taken care of. I dozed off and was awoken maybe an hour later by the promised phone call. I was told that neither of the two men were residents of the area, and that they were simply told not to come back on reports of suspicious activity. After being advised to call again if they came back, I went home. I was tired enough that I had no trouble sleeping for a little while. Around 4 in the morning, I was sharply roused by the metal screen door rattling against its frame. The force slowly grew in intensity, and eventually, the walls and floor were quaking. I peeked through the blinds of my second-story window, which overlooks the front door, and of course, saw the man in the yellow hoodie aggressively attempting to open the screen door. I was shaking in my boots on my mattress, which was still on the floor as I had not yet purchased a bed frame. I received a call from my equally bewildered brother who was in his room. I told him to call my dad while I called the police. It has now been almost 4 years, and I can assure you all that my street smarts have markedly improved. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. For context, I am now 26 and I met my stalker at 14 to 15. So when I was 14, I decided to take ballroom dance classes. That was kind of normal for teenagers in my generation and my country, though you had to change partners each song, so every girl would dance with every boy. In my group that consisted of mostly teens between 14 to 17, there was a really tall, almost 2-meter tall guy who was 21 years old. His name was Philip. We had a nice chat with the times we danced, but he seemed weird because I was young and naive, and that's how I normally made friends. I told him where I lived when he asked me, so the stalking began. At that time, I did not realize that it was stalking. I just thought he had a lot of time on his hands and that he was annoying. Philip would ride on his bike from his house. He lived one town over to my house and asked if I wanted to spend time outside with him and play. After doing that for a few times, I asked my parents to tell him that I was not home when he would come over. Both my parents and I were very oblivious about his actions for a very long time. At one point in time, the stalking ended for a few weeks, and Philip also did not come to dance classes. At that time, I became a part of a friend group of a boy I liked. For some months he had a girlfriend, but they split soon after and I became his girlfriend. Unfortunately, Philip was also friends with the best friend of my boyfriend, so he was also a part of the group. They told me Philip was in a mental hospital. In the span of his stalking, Philip was in mental hospitals multiple times, and every time he was, I was glad because then I had some peace. When I was 16, my family and I had to move because our landlady had thrown us out. She wanted to live in the property herself, so we moved one town over. We started living 2 streets apart from my stalker, and every time Philip was out of the hospital he would be at my house. At my father's birthday he rang again, and because my family had guests they told me to open the door, and there he was looming over me like a dark menacing shadow man. I told him to leave and I tried to close the door but he blocked it, so I was standing there afraid and begging him to leave. At one time I even ran inside to get my dad to send him away, but my dad said he is your friend, so it's your problem. So I went back to the door and I begged and pleaded that Philip please leave. At one point he was kneeling / sitting in my doorway. After almost 2 hours he finally left, and at that point it was obvious for me. Finally I had realized what type of behavior it was. He was a stalker and he was fixated on me. The next day I sat down with my parents and told them that I was afraid of Philip, and my dad also apologized to me for putting me in that situation and not helping me. The next time Philip came to my house, my dad was there and told him that I do not want any contact with him, so he left. After a few more incidents like that he stopped showing up at my door, and I thought we got rid of my stalker. But every time I started to live happily, starting to forget my fear of him, a letter, an email, or a gift showed up, it would send my back into my fears. At 20 I was out of school, and to pass the year I had to wait to start my job. I worked in a grade school in a voluntary after-school care club for grade schoolers. After a month or two my mom woke me up in the morning and told me to get dressed because she had called the cops. Apparently Philip was at my house again every morning at our door and asked for me, and my parents didn't tell me so I wouldn't get scared again. Finally, after the cops told Philip 3 times to leave and he ignored them, they arrested him, and he screamed and screamed my name and that he was burning for me and that the cops heard him. My parents and I were standing in the kitchen listening. The situation was so absurd and so much for me that I started laughing hysterically. We filed a report at the police for stalking and trespassing, but the officers said that they could not do anything because he hadn't hurt me physically. We tried to get a restraining order but it didn't go through. A week later Philip had sneaked into our garden and like in a movie he threw rocks at my window. Idiot me opened the window but did not see anything until it clicked, and I ran downstairs and told my dad that my stalker was in the garden. Philip escaped. A week after that I was in the kitchen cooking when Philip rang the doorbell again, and because we have no way of seeing who was at the door I opened. And there he was again telling me that he missed me and saying that he had peeked through the blinds of the windows in the living room the past week to see if I was there. My parents were not home. If they had been I would have ran, but like this I had to swallow my fear and stand in the doorway listening to Philip talk until my boyfriend came. I had sent him an SMS and he was on his way. After my boyfriend arrived he told Philip to leave and he did. Philip mentioned in passing that he now also has a girlfriend. After that I did not see Philip again for a long time. A friend told me that he was taken by the men in white coats because he had believed that his mom was possessed by the devil. I was glad. It wasn't until 2 years later when I got a letter from court. I was a witness and was told to attend in the case of an assault related to Philip. Apparently after coming out of the mental hospital he had a big fight with his girlfriend and hit her, and because she was scared she played dead. Philip called an ambulance and the police finally had something against him. After the hearing he was admitted again to a mental hospital. I finally was able to get a restraining order and he was ordered to stay at least 30 meters away from our property. I was so glad. The restraining order also implied that if he broke any of the requirements he would go to jail. So it was over. 2 years ago I also moved out of my parents' house. I, a 29-year-old woman, grew up in a nice suburban neighborhood. I lived in the same house my entire childhood and only left once I moved out as an adult. I always felt safe, leaving our doors unlocked, window open, going for late night walks as a teenager. I was around 17 when I noticed strange things started happening around my house. My house was also haunted, so weird noises and things moving on their own were not a new thing. This is probably why I and my family dismissed my experiences for too long. As a teenager, I worked in a movie theater and I did not work until the afternoon and would get off very late at night. I turned into quite the night owl, and it was normal for me to stay awake until about 3 in the morning. It started off as my dog reacting to things outside. I would peek outside my window and I would never see anything, so I assumed my dog was just hearing noises and overreacting. Not too long after this started, I was outside and noticed there were handprints and a mark between them on my window, as if somebody was pressing their forehead against the glass. At the time I just dismissed it. I had plenty of friends coming in and out of my house and they would knock on my windows sometimes as they arrived. My window was by the driveway as you walk to the front door. The weird thing is that this window is very large. The window would start about 3 feet from the ground. It went at least 8 feet high and was about 4 feet wide. I lived in a 1-story house. The forehead and hand marks were at least 6 foot 5 feet high from the ground. I definitely did not have any friends who were that tall, and everyone in my family is less than 5'6". Soon after that, I woke up around 5 in the morning to my car alarm going off. Again, I did not think anything of it and dismissed the situation. one. This happened a few more times within the next few weeks, always between 4 or 5 in the morning, but the last time I noticed handprints on the top of my car as if somebody was trying to crawl through my open sunroof. After that, I made sure to close all my windows and lock the doors. Again, I dismissed it thinking just some hoodlums were trying to get into unlocked open cars. Not long after the car incident, things started to escalate. One morning as I was leaving to school, I found a small stepladder outside of my window, leaning against the house as if somebody was looking through my window. I had blinds that would move from the top and bottom. I normally had the blinds closed on the bottom and left about 2 feet open on top to allow sunlight in, but still have privacy. When I looked at my window, I could still see the handprints and forehead marker placed right above the opening of my blinds. This means they were able to use a step ladder to get a good look into my room. With the ladder against my window, I started to piece together the events over the last few months and realized I had a peeping Tom. I brought this up to my parents, but they did not seem to worry and made no effort to do anything about it. Over the next year, I found the ladder against my window many more times. This person would use an old step ladder that we had in the side yard that was unlocked. I would continuously put the step ladder back in the side yard, but it would continue to show up next to my window on many mornings. I don't know why I did not just put the step ladder in a place that was not accessible. To be honest, I was a teenager smoking a lot of weed at this time, so I feel as though I was not using very much critical thinking. I have 2 other sisters who lived with us, but they did not seem to notice anything weird happening. About a year after I noticed the occurrences, we found my sister's bra was out in the yard and we did not have any explanation. This made me think that somebody may be trying to actually get in the house when we were gone with success. I became extremely paranoid. Again, my parents were aware that all of this was happening, but did not care to do anything about it. The last incident before we called the police was after a rainy night we found bare footprints outside of my sister's window in the mud. The screen had been fiddled with as if somebody was trying to get it off of the window. Once this happened, my parents started to take it more seriously. It's funny because they did not care what incidents were happening directly to me, but the moment my sister had this experience, they decided to report it. The police could not do anything about it. They offered to send police every once in a while to fill out their paperwork in front of our house to make it seem like there was a police presence. This only happened one time and they never came back. My older sister made her boyfriend aware of the situation, so they decided to sit in the car all night and watch for the pervert to show up. Every time he would try to pull an all-nighter to watch for this person, no one would show up. Looking back now, it makes me think that someone very close to my house must be the peeping Tom, because he must have been close enough to see we had another person watching out for us. After a few years of these experiences, my sisters and I all moved out and we have not noticed anything weird happen since. It still bothers me knowing that this person was never caught and that we still have no idea who it was. It makes me frustrated knowing that it could be a next door neighbor who we thought was normal, but was actually a pervert. This all was happening around 2010 to 2013. It was before we had easy affordable access to security cameras, such as Ring and Blink. I wish we had cameras so we could know who this person was, but there is no point in dwelling over the past. All I know is now that I am an adult, I will always have security cameras around my house, especially if I have young daughters. I have also bought my parents some security cameras. They still live in the house. Maybe one day those cameras will catch the peeping Tom, but I don't think he will come back now that my sisters and I are all moved out. My story takes place 2 years ago, between the 2 first containment in France. I was home alone in my small apartment, working on something for my internship that I was stressed about. It was the beginning of the afternoon at 12. Someone knocked on my door, but I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to open up, and it was a guy I knew. Let's call him Jim. Jim and I had slept together a few times a few weeks before, until he pushed me away without explanation. We were still friends, but I was a little hurt. Was I that bad? Had he gotten what he wanted, I wasn't interested anymore. I didn't dare ask the question because I was getting a little attached, and I preferred to wait for it to pass, especially since we were bound to run into each other again. Indeed, Jim had recently got a room in the flat of a friend of mine. The situation was quite funny because he had stumbled upon the advertisement without knowing that I knew the other tenants, and my friend didn't know yet that I knew the new roommate. I was going to tell her about it in person when we met again in college for our middle terms, so I knew I was going to see Jim again, but I didn't expect to run into him so soon after he moved in, let alone during a surprise visit from him to my apartment. I asked him what he was doing there. He said he was bored at the dormitory and was just passing through. I invited him in. I was a bit uncomfortable because I still liked him and we had left without any explanation about his rejection before he moved in with my friend. We talked for a while about trivial things, but strangely enough I still remember the main points. Then he wanted to show me a new kind of massage against my stress that he had seen on a video. I hesitated a bit as I was still uncomfortable. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Yes." I sat on the floor and he touched my back for a while, then did it once I was was lying down. I don't remember everything except that at one point his arm was around my neck and I thought I'm not sure I can breathe. And then blackout. Of course the memory of choking didn't come back right away. It took several months, but I'm trying to tell you the story in chronological order. When I woke up, it is dark. I was still on the ground, bleeding. I don't remember if I noticed the injury right away, but I had a large hole in my right side with many cuts underneath. The events are pretty fuzzy in my memory, but I wondered where Jim had gone and why I was alone. I went to look in the hallway, but my keys, which are normally always in the lock, were missing. I found the spare and looked outside. No one was there. Then I had my first stupid reflex. I thought I'm hurt. I need to disinfect and started to take a shower. I think I fell asleep and had nightmares of being tortured and kidnapped in the shower, probably a way for my brain to try to warn me that something bad was happening. I then looked for my phone, which was also missing from the apartment. I was confused. Probably drugged, I realized later. I decided to go to bed to resume the search after resting. I told myself if I'm still hurt when I wake up, it must be real. It seemed very logical in my mind at that moment. When I woke up, my mind was already a little clearer, but I was still not totally myself. It was 8 or 9 at night, I think. I was still bleeding. I looked for my phone again, and I started to panic as I couldn't find it. I tried to calm down. I told myself that it was probably there somewhere. I just had to ask someone to call me. I contacted my best friend, let's call him Tom, via messenger through my computer. I still had a hard time unlocking my computer. I couldn't type my code. I think I was still drugged. Luckily, Tom was online. He tried to call me on my phone, but no ringing could be heard in the apartment. I think he figured out that I wasn't in my right mind because he called me on Messenger to see if I was okay. It was he who gave me the details of our conversation. I have almost no memory of it. I said, if you think you've been hurt, do you call the fire department or the police first? He freaked out and asked me to explain what was going on. I was very confused, but I think he got the gist of it. He asked, did Jim do this to you? I don't know, baby. I was still in denial at that point. Tom called the police on me. He couldn't come to help me himself because he was studying in another city. As I waited for the cops to arrive, I began to realize that I had completely messed up the crime scene by touching everything looking for my phone, not to mention the shower and the nap, which could have killed me in retrospect. I was still in no pain though. The hole in my side started to hurt when I was taken care of by the paramedics that the cops called when they saw the extent of my injuries. I had to undergo surgery as a result of this assault, which took me months to accept as an attempted murder with a knife. I had a hole in my liver and was bleeding a lot. Luckily, my other organs were not affected. While I was in the hospital, the cops came to take my statement and took Jim into custody. Imagine the surprise of my friend and her roommates when they found out that the new roommate not only knew me but was also accused of assaulting and robbing me. 1 week after the assault, when I got out of the hospital, the first bad news was that the cops had not been able to retrieve the recordings from the surveillance cameras in my building, which had already been erased because the procedures had been too long. The next day, the policewoman in charge of the investigation told me that, of course, Jim denied having been at my place that day, and nobody was at the flat to confirm if he was indeed at home all day. That's it for now. Go home to your parents and get some therapy. Right. Big up to my psychologist who is an incredible person and helped me a lot. And then I waited for a long time and I had to have the seals from my building analyzed for Jim's DNA. Without video or witnesses, it was the only way to prove that he was my attacker, or at least that he was in my apartment that day. It took a year and a half to get the prosecutor's verdict. No further action. No identifiable DNA other than mine had been found at the crime scene. I probably destroyed everything with the shower. So there you have it. We can't pursue the investigation. I could never prove it was Jim. I don't have any memory of the assault itself. I don't think I'll ever find them, but I have no doubt that Jim did this to me. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I just remembered a fun encounter that might serve as a warning to those working late at night. I was 24 at the time, working at a nightclub about a 10-minute walk from my home. I used to close on Tuesday nights slightly earlier than most nights as it was generally our slowest night of the week, closing around 12 at night instead of keeping customers until 2:30 at night. Usually I'd be the only one left as I'd start cutting staff as the night went on, and since it was a slower day of the week we didn't have security on. About 2 months in of regularly closing at 12 at night, I was walking home. I used to bring in bulkier clothes to hide my figure when leaving alone as I've been followed/chased home multiple times before, and we'd often get men waiting after hours for us girls to come out knowing we'd eventually come out after closing and didn't want to attract attention to myself. I also used to walk home as I didn't have a car and had a few terrifying experiences with Uber drivers not actually driving me home, turning out to be fake cabs / Uber drivers or harassing me until I pretended to show interest or give them some way of contacting me, to which Uber would just give me a $5 coupon for the trouble, but that's a story for another time. The bar was located along a main road that was home to the majority of the other bars and restaurants in the city downtown. Often at this time I'd maybe see a handful of people, but the streets were generally empty. I'm walking and notice a parked car about a block away. The driver noticed me and U-turns around to be on the same side of the street as me. Now he's catcalling me and trying to get me to come into his car. I don't engage and keep walking. We're maybe a block or two past the initial spot I saw him, and he's been slowly driving alongside the sidewalk. I'd crossed the street but didn't want to get near his car. He keeps this up until about the halfway mark when he takes off in his car, and I'm just relieved he's gone. Psych, this who comes blasting back down the road. He does. Now my walk has turned into a light jog, which then turns into me full on running. I'm running behind closed bars and businesses, now trying to find a back route to get home without him seeing where I live. At one point I'm running through bushes and mud. No matter what street I end up on, his car is waiting for me. Eventually I run right in front of his car while it's parked on the side street beside my place and run into my house through the back entrance. The back entrance is obscured by plenty of trees and car, and the surrounding houses are multiple unit homes, so I was confident he didn't see what door I got in through. Fast forward to the following Tuesday and I'm walking home. Guess whose car is parked at the halfway mark? This went on for the next 4 Tuesdays, except he started parking on the street in front of my house until I begged my manager to take me off closing that specific shift. The last time I saw him, one of the apartment buildings along the way had a few cop cars and cops standing around the entrance, and I stayed with him, which led him to drive off for the night. A week passes and I'm no longer on that shift. A coworker of mine sends me a news article via text. I open it and see that the man who's been following me was arrested for doing this to multiple girls in the city along the street my work was on and that I lived on. He got caught because he'd followed a university student up to her house and wouldn't drive away. She called the cops and he was still there by the time they came to arrest him. He got out the next day, I believe, and was arrested a few more times and was put on restrictions. Couldn't be out of his parents' house between certain hours unaccompanied by either parent before he was deported. I've also heard he didn't actually get deported, but I moved away shortly after and didn't keep up with the news on him. I don't live there anymore and wouldn't be giving myself away. So did the creep in the car who used to follow me and multiple other young women home. Let's not meet ever again. Quick backstory, I've had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never aggressive or sent me proper threats, so stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear. To be honest, after a while I also wasn't scared anymore since he almost never came close to me. I know being stalked can affect people severely even in a case like mine, and that's totally valid, but I guess I just got lucky and was never really psychologically affected by it. This stalky behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times but they weren't able to, or really tried to be honest, catch or identify him. About 3 weeks ago I discovered the German version of r/IMA, you know the next word here, and thought that people might want to know about what it's like to have a stalker. Since I barely use any social media aside from Reddit and have no personally identifying information here, I didn't think he'd ever see it. One person even asked, does he know you're putting him on blast on Reddit, and I answered maybe. Maybe it would make him angry, maybe he'd be turned on. Don't know, don't care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it and he did not like it. Like I said, he was never aggressive and never came close to me. The closest I know of was when he sent me a picture of myself unlocking my apartment door, taken from the corner of the steps above. Sorry if that makes no sense. I don't know how else to explain it, but I consider myself a pretty vigilant person, and I'm thinking that he might have hid a camera there instead of being there to take the photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he did. I don't know how he got wind of the posts I made, but he did. The next week was quiet, no letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then he left me letters with printed out questions and my answers from the post I made. He also left me a long hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue I had posted on the subreddit. His letters were never hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later I got a gift, but this time he didn't leave it in my mailbox or at my car like he usually did. No, this time he left it inside the apartment building right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment but opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was taped shut. As I'm typing it out I realized that wasn't a good idea at all and could have ended badly for me, but luckily he didn't send me a bomb or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, the kind you use to tape off walls when painting nothing nothing you could use to restrain someone, a television remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of band-aids with a few used ones, not actually, just made to look that way according to the police, and a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago and my boyfriend was next to me but cut out of the photo. The frame was shattered and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame, and they were also intentionally put inside the crumbled newspaper that was stuffed in there to keep it all in place. I called the police right away and gave it to them. They were more concerned this time. Finally, thanks, and told me they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave me any letters/gifts for about another week and a half. But 8 days ago it started again. I found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me, how I haven't been appreciating his effort, how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago I left my apartment in the morning and heard a crunch sound as I stepped on my doormat. He put broken glass under it in the night. I went off to work because I was in a hurry and was just going to make my boyfriend call the police, but then I found my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, lights smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on. "It's time soon, miss my last name." I went back inside and called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just pissed at this point, which I made very clear. If, for some reason, you're like me and just too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, then all of this, the letters, gifts, photos, even the glass under my doormat, are just really annoying and inconvenient. But my car was useless to me now and the threat scared even me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police took the footage as evidence, even though the dash cam footage wasn't of high quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before, but they said it's not enough, and they told me they'll look into it further and promised to send more patrol cars again. Then it was quiet for 2 more days, until 2 days ago. Someone rang the doorbell at just after 4 in the morning. My boyfriend and I got up, but we were both hesitant, but I saw blue lights outside, and just as I got up I heard them shouting, "This is the police. Please open the door." They told us they were called by one of our downstairs neighbors who came home from his night shift about an hour earlier and heard someone else enter the building after them before the door fell shut. My neighbors know of my situation and I've asked them to make sure they don't let strangers into the building. This neighbor then went into his own apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they turned back on. They did. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor are only me and my boyfriend, and a single mom with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 in the morning. So he called the police. They came and found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. He should have been able to see the cop cars since there's a little window up there and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He's finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a provocative Reddit post, and one very vigilant and caring neighbor. But he's finally done. For now at least. He's facing several charges and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now I've finally got some peace. If not for being 5 miles from cell reception, and the way this story ends, there would be a police report for verification. I will be changing names, locations, and some details in order to protect the privacy of the innocent. A buddy of mine and I try to camp twice a month now that I have a vehicle that can be trusted to get me to some of the more remote areas of our state. We planned a camping trip for this past weekend from the 18th of February to the 20th. We chose a fairly remote location we had been to the previous weekend. The previous weekend we were the only people we'd seen within 1 mile of our camp spot. Friday night we got there and set up. This story takes place Saturday night. It's about 9 at night, so the sun is long gone and the mood hasn't quite risen yet. It's pitch black out, other than when our fire lights up. Suddenly, we hear a man screaming. We listen intently, silently sharing an anxious look. At first, we were hoping it was someone drunk and having a little too much fun, but it quickly becomes obvious this isn't fun party screaming. It isn't even like he's hurt. It sounds full of despair, anger, and anguish. I'm going to take a moment to remind you that this is at 9 at night, pitch black night, in the middle of nowhere woods 5 miles from the nearest cell phone signal. We hadn't seen anyone in hours. The screaming continues for what felt like hours, but was probably about 5 solid minutes. We had no idea what to make of it, and started feeling extremely paranoid. We gathered up anything remotely close to a weapon, and tried to come up with explanations of the screaming while keeping our eyes on the forest around us. After about 15 tense minutes of fear-induced paranoia, I nearly fell out of my seat as I watched a flashlight and lantern slowly enter our camp. camp. I greeted the stranger with a basic how's it going before he was even lit up by the fire. He responded quickly but flatly by asking if we could do him a favor. That depends on the favor, my buddy, and I said in unison, obviously tense, holding our weapons close to us. The stranger proceeded to ask if he could hang out for a second by the fire, giving the two of us and one of him, plus our myriad of weapons gathered from around camp to within our arm's reach. We decided to agree and let him hang out. After a short second of awkward silence, I ask him what is going on. He proceeds to tell me and my buddy that he was camping down the trail with his buddy and that his buddy had snapped and tried to kill him. Wait, what? I said before the thought even finished processing in my head. Is that the screaming we heard earlier? The man slowly nods, staring blankly into the fire, and begins his story. We were just hanging out, man. We came up earlier today and my buddy just freaked out. He started screaming and just wouldn't stop. Then he attacked me, he lunged at me, and I told him to just back off and chill, you know. Well, he kept coming after me and it started getting pretty violent and I'm pretty sure he was going to kill me, so I grabbed my car keys, the lights, and ran. I don't know what to do, man. He chased me when I ran and I don't know what to do. We don't have firearms or anything, but we do have a hatchet. My buddy and I look at each other for a second, completely astonished. Then something horrible dawned on me. Wait, he chased you? Like, he's on his way here, right now. The man just slowly nods in reply, and right on cue we hear screaming from maybe 30 to 40 feet from our camp, down on the main trail. I just want your balance, Gary. I want your balance. Where are you? Where? Gary, I never in my life heard a man scream like this. I've never heard anything like it in my life. It was a brutal, guttural scream that was shrill to the ears yet deep in pitch. The sound of someone gone completely mad, and the way he said the stranger's name would switch erratically from long and sing-songy to short, guttural punches of sound. We killed our lights, became silent, and listened. By some miracle, the madman didn't notice our camp and continued walking down the trail, screaming the whole way. We ended up chatting with who we'll call Gary for hours, listening to the screaming getting further and further. Come to find out, they had taken 5 grams of magic mushrooms each, and his buddy, who we'll call Tyler, who was a coworker of his, was fine for 3.5 hours, then suddenly snapped. It seemed as though Tyler thought he could kill Gary and steal his good trip. We hear the screams get further and further for over 2 hours. By this time it's 11 at night, the moon is starting to come out, and it's below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Tyler had no jacket or flashlight according to Gary. My buddy and I are way too drunk to drive out of camp to get cell service, as it was snowy and icy and required 2 to 3 miles of highway driving after getting off the trail, and Gary was still lightly feeling the effects of weed and mushrooms, so he couldn't drive either. We had to make the decision to let the guy wander, hope he sobered up, and could find his way back. And he did. Oh, he did. Right into our camp. We hear yelling after about an hour of no screams, maybe 30 to 50 feet from camp again. Hey, help, please help me, I'm lost. And we could tell the man's walking from the woods into our camp. We tell Gary to hide just in case, and greet the man with me carrying my 12-gauge shotgun and my 40 caliber pistol holstered, my buddy carrying his rifle and his 2 9mm Glocks holstered, and with our flashlights on our brightest settings in his face. He was about 6'3" and approximately 300 pounds. We talked to him, decided he was calm enough to walk with, and walked him back to his camp. He seemed really remorseful, said he blacked out and didn't remember anything, and had a falling out with his buddy. We escorted him back to his camp down the trail, returned and told Gary that Tyler seemed cool, and if anything else happened to scream and come running, we would come out and help him out, and ended up being a happy ending. We made friends with Gary, and I got his phone number to make sure the next day he got back into town safely, back to his wife and kid, and we're actually planning a camping trip with him soon. But Tyler, who wandered screaming like a deranged maniac into the forest, potentially wielding a hatchet to murder your friend to steal this good trip, or whatever it is your psychosis-filled mind was thinking, for the love of God, let's not meet again. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.